Welcome back to Aszkaban, the channel where the whole wizarding world hangs on a single what if. Today's adventure: what if Sirius was freed at Harry's birth by a will naming 12 crimes against Dumbledore? Before we dive in, do smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so a story like this one never slips past you. Wands ready then, now let's begin. Chapter 1. The reading of wills. The motorcycle came down out of the cloud over Godric's Hollow at a speed that would have killed a Muggle and very nearly killed Sirius Black. And he did not slow it, because slowing it would have meant admitting that the orange glow ahead was a house. He had told himself the whole flight that it was a chimney. Cottages had chimneys. Chimneys glowed. There were 9 perfectly ordinary explanations for an orange light in a village at midnight, and he had recited all 9 of them over the Bristol Channel, and not one of them survived the moment the bike cleared the church steeple, and he saw that the top floor of the Potter's cottage was simply gone, not burned, not collapsed, but removed, as though something had reached down and taken a bite. He put the bike into the road hard enough to throw sparks and was off it before it stopped moving. The gate was open. That was the first wrong thing his mind would let him hold. James kept the gate latched because Harry had learned to crawl, and James had a horror, comic and total, of the boy getting into the lane. The gate was open and swinging, and Sirius went through it and up the path, and the door was off its hinges, lying flat in the hall like a dropped card, and there was a smell he knew from the war and refused to name. James. His own voice came out wrong. James. He found him at the foot of the stairs. There are facts the mind accepts in order and facts it refuses, and Sirius's mind, which was quicker than almost anyone gave it credit for, and which he had spent 21 years training to be flippant precisely so that no one would look at it too hard, did the accepting in the wrong order. It accepted that James was on the floor. It accepted that his eyes were open. It accepted the angle of him, which was the angle of a man who had turned to buy 3 seconds and been given none. It did not accept the rest, not yet, because upstairs, where the ceiling was gone, where the cold October sky was simply present in the house, a baby was crying. Sirius went up the stairs 2 and 3 at a time. Lily was in the nursery. He did not look at her for long. He would look at her later, for years, in the dark. Right now he had perhaps 4 working thoughts, and he spent none of them on the thing he could not change. The cot was scorched along one rail, and in the cot, red-faced, furious, alive, with a cut on his forehead bleeding in a line that did not look like any cut Sirius had seen, was Harry. "All right," Sirius said. All right, I've got you. I've got you, Pronkslet, I've got you." He lifted the baby, and the baby gripped his collar with the absolute, unreasoning trust of the very young, and Sirius stood in the ruin of his best friend's house with the cold sky over his head and held on, and for a moment the 4 working thoughts went down to one, which was, he is warm, he is breathing, he is here. Then the floorboard behind him took a great deal of weight, and a voice the size of a barn said, "Sirius." He turned with his wand already up, which told him something about the last hour he had not wanted to know about himself, and lowered it at once, because filling the doorway, ducked nearly double under the broken lintel, with tears running frankly into his beard, was Rubeus Hagrid. "It's me," Hagrid said. "It's only me. Oh, Sirius, look at it. Look what he done." "What are you doing here, Dumbledore?" Hagrid wiped his face with a hand like a Christmas ham. "He sent me." Soon as the wards went, see, the wards over the house, he felt 'em go, and he sent me to fetch Harry. Bring him safe. He held out arms in which Sirius could have comfortably slept. "Give him here now. I'll take him to Dumbledore." It would have been the most natural thing in the world to hand the baby over. Hagrid had carried Sirius himself on his shoulders when Sirius was a first year too small for the boats. Hagrid loved James the way a dog loves the sun. There was no safer pair of hands in Britain, and Sirius nearly did it. He nearly did it, and that he did not, that he stopped, with the baby already shifting toward Hagrid's reaching hands, was the first hinge on which the whole rest of it would turn, and he would spend a long time afterward trying to work out what had caught him. It was not suspicion of Hagrid, it was the word fetch. Dumbledore had felt the wards fail, and his first act, his very first act, had been to dispatch a man to fetch the child, not to come himself, not to find James and Lily, to collect the boy and bring him in. And under that quieter, the thing Sirius had been not thinking since the Bristol Channel, that 2 weeks ago in a panic he had told James he was the wrong choice for secret keeper, too obvious, a decoy was wanted, switched to Peter, no one would ever suspect Peter, and that the Fidelius had held, which meant the secret had not been tortured out of anyone, it had been given. "No," Sirius said. Hagrid's hand stopped. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean I'm his godfather." It came out steadier than Sirius felt. "James named me. It's done properly, Hagrid. There's parchment on it. If he goes anywhere, he goes with me. Dumbledore says Dumbledore can want what he likes." The flippancy came back online, a reflex armor. "It's not Dumbledore's name on the Godfather, right, is it? He wasn't in the room. I held the candle, so." He hitched Harry higher. I'm not handing my godson to a man who isn't here on the say-so of a man who sent a messenger instead of his feet. He'll be that cross with me, Hagrid said, and the largest thing in his face was misery, because Hagrid hated above all things to be caught between two people he loved. Then be cross back, Sirius said more gently. You've done nothing wrong. You came to keep Harry safe, and Harry's safe. Tell him that. What might have happened next, whether Hagrid's loyalty or his orders would have won, was settled by neither of them, because between one breath and the next the air in the ruined nursery folded, and a third person was standing on the scorched floorboards who had not walked up the stairs. He was not tall. That was the first thing about him that disagreed with his reputation. He came up to Hagrid's elbow, and he was built along the lines of a closed umbrella, and he wore robes of a gray so severe it had opinions, and his face was the color and approximate texture of old saddle leather, and he carried a flat black case under one arm and a staff topped with a single uncut garnet in the other hand, and his eyes, when they went over the room, did not stop on Lily or on the hole in the roof. They did inventory. "Mr. Black," he said. The voice was dry as a closed ledger. "Sirius Orion Black, godson by right of James Fleamont Potter, deceased this night. You will confirm your identity to a representative of Gringotts." "What?" said Sirius. "You will confirm your identity," the goblin said, with the patience of a being who had said far more tedious sentences far more times, "by stating your full name and your mother's maiden name, or by surrendering a drop of blood to this instrument at your preference. I would advise the former. The latter voids on contact with residual dark magic, of which this room has a regrettable quantity." "Who," said Sirius, "are you?" "Thornback. Senior Officer, Estates and Enforcement, Gringotts, London." He set the flat black case on the one undamaged surface in the room, which was the windowsill, and opened it, and it unfolded twice more than a case that size should have been able to, until it was a small writing desk with a green-shaded lamp that lit itself. "I am here to execute a will. Your name, Mr. Black. Sirius Orion Black. My mother was Walburga Black, née Black, which the family thought very funny and no one else ever did." The flippancy ran ahead of him again. He reeled it back. "Whose will?" "James's will is sealed. It's lodged at the ministry. It can't be read for 30 days. That's the law. There's a waiting period." "The ministry copy is sealed," Thornback agreed, and there was something in the precision of the agreement that made Sirius go still. "The ministry copy was sealed at 11:41 this evening, by emergency order, under the signature of the chief warlock of the Wisengamot, 40 minutes ago." He looked up over a pair of half-moon spectacles he had produced from somewhere. "Mr. Potter has been dead for under 2 hours, Mr. Black. Consider how quickly that signature moved." The cold in the room had nothing to do with the hole in the roof. "The Gringotts copy," Thornback continued, drawing a heavy scroll from the case, sealed in green wax with a thumbprint pressed into it, the wax cracked across, broken, activated, "is not sealable by any wizard living, dead, or ennobled. It is a goblin-witnessed testamentary contract. It activates on the confirmed death of both testators, which our instruments registered at 23 minutes past 9 o'clock this evening, and it executes regardless of, and I will use the technical term, regardless of every bloody thing a wizard does about it." He unrolled the scroll. "James and Lily Potter came to my office on the 4th of October. They were frightened people who had done their reading." "Shall I read it, Mr. Black, or shall we stand here and let the gentleman from the order finish fetching the child first?" Hagrid said. I weren't." "Read it," said Sirius. And so the first will Sirius Black ever heard read aloud was read by a goblin in a roofless nursery, with the dead in the next room and the living, hot and small, breathing against his neck. And it began the way these things begin, with the names and the date and the formula, and then it stopped being like anything Sirius had ever heard. "We, James Fleamont Potter and Lily Jean Potter, being of sound mind and very unsound circumstances." Thornback read, in the flat voice of a man for whom the words were just words, which made them worse, "do declare our last wishes, and do further declare the reasons we have been driven to lodge them where no friend of the great or good can reach them. First, should we die, our son Harry James Potter is to be raised by Sirius Orion Black, his godfather by right and by our choice. Not by Lily's sister Petunia Dursley, who hates what Lily is and would hate what Harry is. Not by any guardian appointed by the ministry. Not, and we write this knowing how it will sound, by Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, nor by any person, body, or household selected by him, recommended by him, or standing under his protection. If Sirius cannot, then Remus Lupin. If Remus cannot, then Alice and Frank Longbottom. We have named 4. We have named 4 because we do not trust that fewer would survive the choosing." Hagrid made a low sound, like a hill settling. "Second," Thornback read and turned the scroll, and the green lamp caught a column of writing that ran on, In a hand Sirius knew, Lily's careful copperplate, with James's bolder strokes interrupting it where he had added things. We set down, sworn before the goblin nation and anchored in memory in their vaults, the 12 specific acts by which Albus Dumbledore has, over 11 years, moved us, lied to us, and spent us. We do this not from hatred. We do it because we are about to die for a war he is conducting, and we have realized, too late, that we never agreed to fight it the way he is fighting it, and we will not let our son be the next piece moved across his board. We name them so that if we are gone, they cannot be sealed, and someone with more freedom than we ever had may hold him to account. "Stop," said a new voice from the doorway, warm and grandfatherly and tired. "Oh, Sirius, stop, not like this." Albus Dumbledore had come up the stairs the ordinary way, which was its own kind of statement, and he stood now in the broken doorway with his half-moon spectacles catching the green lamplight and his hands folded inside his sleeves and grief written all over the long lines of his face. And the grief was real. Sirius would never afterward be able to say it was not real. That was the whole horror of the man. That the grief was real and the calculation was real, and they lived in him together and did not fight. "Albus," said Thornback, without looking up, "you are present at the reading of a Gringotts testamentary instrument naming you a party of interest. By the Concord of 1865 you may observe. You may not speak until the reading concludes. If you speak again I will have you removed by set warders, and you are aware that I am permitted to do so, and you are aware that they enjoy it. Sit or stand or go, but be silent." It was Sirius thought, the first time in his life he had ever seen anyone tell Albus Dumbledore to be quiet and have it work. Dumbledore inclined his head. He did not sit. He stood in the doorway with his hands folded, and he watched Sirius hold the baby, and his eyes were very blue and very sad, and Sirius held on tighter. "Continue," said Thornback. "The 12 are enumerated. I am required to read them in full. That is the instrument's instruction, and the instrument's instruction governs. Mr. Black, attend, because at the end of this reading you will be the executor of these accusations, and an executor who does not know the contents of his charge is no use to anyone." He read them. 1. In the year 1969, Albus Dumbledore caused the records of the Hog's Head Inn to be altered to conceal that a prophecy concerning the war was overheard in part by a servant of the enemy, and that he, Dumbledore, knew it had been overheard, and told no one whose life it touched. Sirius did not understand all of that. He filed it where he filed the rest. 2. In the same matter, Albus Dumbledore withheld the full text of that prophecy from us, James and Lily Potter, whose son it may concern, while using the part he chose to share to direct our movements, our hiding, and our deaths. 3. In 1980, Albus Dumbledore advised against, and personally obstructed, our application to leave the country, telling us that flight would be cowardice and that England needed Potters to be seen to stand, when our staying served his war and our going would have served our son. "That is a matter of judgment," Dumbledore said quietly, and Thornback raised one gray finger without looking up, and Dumbledore subsided. 4. Albus Dumbledore holds, and has held since 1971, a debt of secrets over our friend Remus Lupin, by which Lupin's livelihood and liberty depend upon Dumbledore's goodwill, and Dumbledore has used this leverage to set Lupin to watch us, and to watch others, and to report. That one went into Sirius like a knife, because it explained a year of small wrongnesses, of Remus drifting, of Remus and him circling each other with a suspicion neither could name, and he understood, standing in the cold, that they had been set against each other, that the thing which had poisoned the Marauders in the last year had a name, and the name was in this room with its hands folded. 5. In the structuring of the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore required oaths of its members that bind them to him personally and not to the cause, oaths most of them do not know the full reach of, including an oath that prevents them speaking against him to any authority of the ministry or the law. 6. Dumbledore has, on at least 3 occasions known to us, placed members of the Order in danger he could have prevented, in order to obtain intelligence or to test the loyalty of suspected double agents, and has called the resulting deaths the price of war. 7. Dumbledore arranged the appointment of himself as magical guardian of any orphan child of the Order lacking named kin, a position he holds over a dozen children now, by which he controls their schooling, their vaults, and their futures, and which he obtained by quiet amendment to a Wisengamot statute that no one read closely because he proposed it. "That one," said Sirius, "is about Harry." "That one," Thornback agreed, "is now about Harry, yes, and you may wish to ensure it does not remain so." 8. He turned the scroll. Dumbledore has, for the duration of the war, drawn upon the vaults of Order families for the cause, through a fund of which he is the sole signatory without account, audit, or return. The Potter vaults among them, and we have never seen a ledger. Sirius looked once at the silent old man in the doorway, and the old man looked back with infinite sadness and said nothing, because he had been told to say nothing, and the obedience itself was a kind of answer. 9. In 1981, learning that one of the 4 people closest to us was a traitor, Dumbledore did not tell us which, though we now believe he suspected. He allowed us to choose our secret keeper in ignorance, and we believe, though we cannot prove, that he found a use in our uncertainty. 10. Dumbledore counseled us against placing our trust in goblin law, against this very instrument, telling us that to lodge our affairs outside the wizarding establishment was to make ourselves enemies of it, which is the counsel a man gives who does not wish to be reached. 11. Dumbledore has spoken to us more than once of Harry's death as a thing that might be necessary. He has used the words, when the time comes. He has looked at our son the way a man looks at a tool he has not yet needed to use, and we did not understand him, and we are afraid we understand him now. The nursery was very quiet. Even Hagrid had stopped weeping. The green lamp hissed. 12. Thornback Reed and his flat voice did not change, which was the most terrible thing about it. Dumbledore is Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation, and Headmaster of Hogwarts, and holds all 3 at once, so that the body that would judge him, the body that would oversee him, and the place where the next generation is shaped are the same man, and we set down that no person should be permitted to be all 3. And we set it down knowing he will read this, because we are past being afraid of his reading. Thornback rolled the scroll to its last inch. We sign this in fear and in love. We do not know if we are right about everything we have written. We are certain we are right about enough. To whoever holds our son, he was loved. Tell him that first and often before you tell him any of the rest. Signed, James Potter, Lily Potter, this 4th of October, 1981, witnessed and sealed in the vaults of Gringotts, where it cannot be unmade. He let the scroll roll itself shut. For a long moment nobody spoke. The wind came through the hole in the roof and stirred the burnt edge of the cot blanket. Harry had gone to sleep against Sirius's neck, the deep sudden sleep of an exhausted infant, one fist still knotted in the collar. Now, Dumbledore said, and Thornback did not stop him this time, because the reading had concluded and the man had earned the right to his answer. Now you have heard it, Sirius, and I see what it has done to your face, and I do not blame you. They were frightened. Frightened people write frightened things, and they put the worst construction on every kindness, and they were not wrong that I have made hard choices. God knows I have made hard choices, but you knew them, you knew James. Did James strike you as a man who would write a thing like this in cold blood? He was beside himself. He was hunted. He grasped at a story that made his terror somebody's fault. The blue eyes were wet. I love them, Sirius. I am the one who is going to have to bury them. And I am asking you, not ordering. I have no power to order you, to let me take the boy somewhere the blood of his mother will keep him safe, because there is a protection in that sacrifice that nothing I can build will equal, and it requires he live with her kin, and it is the one thing I am certain of in all of this. It was a good argument. Sirius, who was cleverer than he let people see, and had survived his own family, by knowing exactly how a beautiful argument is built to load the conclusion before you reach it, recognized that it was a good argument. It had grief in it and truth in it. There probably was something in the blood ward business. Lily had died for the boy. That kind of thing left marks. And it had, folded into the middle of it where you would not look, the single instruction that would undo every other word the will had spoken. Let him live with her kin, with Petunia, outside Sirius's reach, inside Dumbledore's. Mr. Thornback, Sirius said. If I hand Harry to Hagrid right now, and Hagrid takes him to Petunia Dursley, what happens to the will? It is violated in its first and principal provision, said Thornback, and Gringotts treats the violation of a testamentary contract as it treats the violation of any contract, which is to say as theft, and pursues it as theft against the persons who effected it in perpetuity with interest. Should you wish a less technical answer, we would consider the child stolen, and we would never stop trying to get him back, and we are very patient, and we do not die at convenient intervals. And if I keep him? Then the will is satisfied, and Gringotts stands behind your guardianship as the executing party, and any wizard who attempts to remove the child from you attempts to break a goblin contract, which is a matter we are constitutionally incapable of regarding as anything other than war. Thornback closed the writing desk. It folded back into a flat black case. I will be frank, Mr. Black, because frankness is cheaper than litigation. The child's mother died working a protection. Albus is not lying about that. Our instruments registered it. There is residue of a blood sacrifice charm in this room, and it is real and it is potent. But a blood ward is not the only protection on this earth, and the ancient House of Black maintains wards of its own that predate the statute of secrecy, and you are its heir, and frankly, between Lily Potter's love and 1,200 years of black paranoia, I would back the paranoia. Choose, Mr. Black, the night is getting on and there is a great deal of paper. Sirius looked at Dumbledore. If you take him, Dumbledore said very gently, you take responsibility for what comes. You are 21 years old, you have no house, Grimmauld Place would poison him. You of all people know that. You are reckless, Sirius. You loved James like a brother and you would die for this child without a second thought, and that is exactly what frightens me, because a man who will die for a child is not always a man who can raise one. There is a war still out there. Voldemort is not gone, diminished, perhaps scattered, but a thing like that does not simply stop, and they will come for Harry and they will come for whoever holds him, and the blood protection is a wall, I understand. What is yours? Your temper, your motorbike. And it was a good argument too, and it was even kind, and that was the moment Sirius understood the shape of the whole rest of his life, because the kindness was the trap. The man was not wrong that Sirius was reckless. The man was not wrong that Sirius was alone and young and grieving and unequipped. Every word of it was true. And Dumbledore was offering in the warmest possible voice to take the weight off, to be the grown-up, to make the hard choice, to carry the boy somewhere safe so that Sirius could go and grieve and be 21, and all Sirius had to do was set Harry down. He thought about the 11th crime, when the time comes. The way a man looks at a tool he has not yet needed. You're right, Sirius said. Dumbledore's face eased. You're right that I'm reckless, Sirius went on. You're right that I'm 21 and I haven't got the faintest idea how to raise a baby, and the only house I own would give him nightmares for a decade. You're right about all of it. Here's the thing, Albus. He shifted Harry, and the small fist tightened on his collar in his sleep, and his voice had gone very level, which was what happened to it on the rare occasions he meant something entirely. James and Lily knew all of that. They knew exactly how reckless I am, Merlin. They've watched me do half the stupid things you're worried about, and they wrote my name first anyway. 4 names, the goblin said. They named 4. And they put me at the top, the reckless one, the one with no house and a temper and a motorbike, before they'd let the boy go anywhere near you. So either they were 2 frightened people who lost their judgment at the end. He met the blue eyes, or they knew something about both of us, and they were being very, very precise. And I knew them, Albus. You said it yourself. I knew them. They weren't sloppy when it mattered. Dumbledore was silent. I'll take him, Sirius said to Thornback. Where do I sign? It is possible that some part of him expected the room to come apart, expected Dumbledore to drop the grandfather and show whatever was under it, expected, on some level he was ashamed of, that he would have to fight his way out of a dead house with a baby on his hip. None of that happened. What happened was that Albus Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment with an expression Sirius could not read, and then nodded slowly, the way a chess player nods when an opponent makes a move he had not weighted heavily enough. Very well, he said. I will not contest it tonight. It would be unseemly and you would only dig in, and I am too old to waste a thing by reaching for it before it's ripe. He turned toward the stairs and paused, a small gray figure against the dark of the landing. You will find, Sirius, that loving him and keeping him are different labors, and that the will protects him from me far better than it equips you for him. When you discover that, and you will, in some cold hour, with the boy screaming and no one to call, I will still be here. I do not bear grudges, I bury my friends and I keep working. Good night. Albus, said Sirius, and the old man paused without turning. The 12 things they wrote, are any of them lies? A pause exactly 1 heartbeat too long. They are, Dumbledore said, the truths of frightened people, which are the most dangerous truths there are because they are made of real facts arranged to break a heart. Good night, Sirius, take care of him, I mean that. Whatever else you believe about me tonight, believe that I mean that. And he went down the stairs and out through the broken door and was gone, and the only sound left in the house was the wind and the green lamp and a baby breathing. Hagrid had to be dealt with, and that was its own small grief, because Hagrid stood there with his enormous hands open and empty and his face working and said, He'll think I failed him. Dumbledore. He'll think I couldn't even fetch a baby right, and Sirius, who had no comfort to spare and found some anyway, crossed to him and put his free hand on the great forearm and said, Hagrid, look at me. You came to keep Harry alive and Harry's alive. You did the job. The rest is between me and Albus, and it always was. Now I need you to do one more thing, and it's the hardest one. I need you to be a witness. A witness. The goblin's going to want it written down, what you saw tonight. Who was here, what was said, the state of the house. Sirius's voice was steady, and he held onto the steadiness the way Harry held onto his collar. And I need you to go and tell the Order, McGonagall, the Bones woman, the ones with sense, the truth, that Sirius Black has Harry lawfully by a Gringotts will, with goblins standing behind it, Not a kidnapping, not Black gone dark, a will. You can do that. You're the only one Dumbledore trusts who is actually in the room, which means you're the only one who can say it and be believed. Hagrid wiped his face with his sleeve, and something in him steadied too, because Hagrid was at his best when given a clear job by someone he loved. I can do that, he said. I can tell him true, I will. Sirius, he looked at the baby and at the burnt cot and at the door behind which Lily lay, and his voice cracked right down the middle. You'll bring him round, when he's grown, you'll bring him to see me. I taught his dad to handle a hippogriff. I'd like to know the boy. You'll be the first visit we make, Sirius said. I swear it. First year's in the boats, Hagrid. You carried me, you'll carry him. And the half-giant nodded and bent with enormous care, and laid one finger against the baby's, sleeping back the way you'd touch something made of soap bubbles. And then he straightened and ducked out under the broken lintel and went down to begin telling the truth, which was, in the end, the only weapon Sirius would ever really have. Thornback waited until the heavy tread had faded down the lane. That was well done, the goblin said in his dry ledger voice, and it was not a compliment so much as an audit. You declined the obvious safety, you secured an independent witness, and you sent that witness to do exactly the thing that most damages the other party's narrative. You have a head for this, Mr. Black, which surprises me, because your file at the bank describes you as, and I quote the account note left by your grandfather, the clever one who has decided to be the foolish one, for reasons that are no business of the bank. He produced, from the flat black case, a fresh roll of parchment and a self-inking quill. We will need an hour, possibly 2. Guardianship transfer, vault rekeying, ward erection over your person and the child, and the lodging of the 12 articles as a live grievance with the bank rather than a dead one in a will. After tonight, they are no longer a dead man's accusation. They are an open matter with an executor of record, and that, Mr. Black, changes their legal weight entirely. A dead man cannot pursue, you can. Sirius sat down on the one chair that had survived with the baby asleep on his chest and looked at the goblin across the burnt nursery and asked the question that mattered. Can I win? Thornback was quiet for a moment, and when he answered, he did the thing goblins almost never do, which was to put down the parchment and speak to the wizard as a person rather than a party. 12 articles, he said. Some are matters of judgment and you will never prove them. The third, the staying in England, a clever advocate makes that disappear. It is one man's advice against another's hindsight. Some are matters of fact and you will prove them absolutely. The 8th, the unaccountable fund, is mathematics, and goblins keep the mathematics, and mathematics does not grieve and cannot be charmed. The 7th is the one that frees the child because it is statute, and statute can be amended, and a thing amended once can be amended twice. The 11th, he paused. The 11th is the one that will cost you the most, because it is the worst, and because it is, as written, unprovable, and because if it is true, it means that man intends one day to look your godson in the eye and tell him he has to die, and you will spend the next decade not knowing whether the kindest, cleverest, most terrible person in our world is grieving in good faith or playing a game whose board he has already drawn. You asked if you can win, you can free the boy, you can open the books. You can break the headmaster's grip on a dozen orphans and 100 vaults. Whether you can prove the worst of it, I do not know. But I will tell you the thing your file says you already know and pretend you don't. The garnet on his staff caught the green light. You do not have to prove all 12 to win. You have to prove enough that no one will ever again be able to take that child from you. Everything past that is justice, and justice is slower than safety, and you will have years. Now, your full name again for the parchment, and we begin. The paperwork took the promised hour and most of a second, and Sirius, who had never been able to sit still through anything in his life, found that he could sit still through this, because every line of it was a brick in a wall around the boy. Thornback worked without ceremony. He rekeyed the Potter vaults to lock out the unaccountable fund, the 8th article, frozen as of tonight. Whatever Albus has drawn before is gone, but he draws no more, and he raised wards over Sirius and the child that did not come from any wand. They came from goblin silver, 3 thin coins he pressed flat against the doorframe and the windowsill, and with a small dry apology against the sole of Harry's booty, and each one drank a drop of Sirius's blood and gave back a thread of green that ran into the walls and vanished. You said black wards, Sirius said. 1,200 years of paranoia. I didn't think you'd be the one casting them. I am not casting them, I am invoicing them. Thornback did not look up. The wards are yours, heir of black. They wake to your blood because the blood is the key the founders cut. Gringotts merely holds the lock. We have held the Black family's deeper instruments in escrow since 1612, when your ancestor lost a wager to mine and paid in custody rather than gold. It was, in retrospect, a poor trade for him and an excellent one for the boy on your chest. He pressed the last coin home. There, no living thing crosses a threshold you sleep behind without your leave. It will not stop a curse thrown from outside. It will stop a man from walking in and lifting him out of his cot, which, given the events of this evening, struck me as the more pressing engineering problem. Sirius looked down at the sleeping weight against him, and then, because the thought had been circling all night and he was too tired to keep it out, he said it aloud. There was a rat, the quill stopped, in the hall when I came in, on the stairs after, a gray rat, fat one by the skirting. Sirius's voice had gone level again. James and Lily didn't keep a rat, Peter keeps a rat. Peter can be a rat, it's how he stopped and made himself say the rest, because saying it was the first proof and unsaid proof was no use to anyone. I told James to switch the Fidelius to Peter 2 weeks ago, my idea, bury the secret in the least likely man, and the Fidelius held tonight Thornback. It wasn't broken, nobody tortured the address out of a corpse, the secret keeper gave it. You understand, the goblin said slowly, setting down the quill, that you are describing, under goblin witness, the single fact the 9th article turns upon. That Dumbledore knew there was a traitor among the 4 and let the choosing happen blind. I'm describing the man who killed them. Sirius's hand had closed without his deciding it, gentle, over the small back, and the one witness in the world who can clear my name before anyone thinks to dirty it and prove the 9th article and the 6th all at once, a rat who used to be my friend. He looked up. I want him alive, Thornback. Everything in me wants to go down that drain after him as the dog and shake him till his neck breaks, and I want you to write it down somewhere that I didn't, that I sat here. Because a dead rat is a dead rat, and a live one under your truth serum is 12 articles with legs. Thornback looked at him for a long moment, and then he picked the quill back up and wrote a line and read it aloud as he wrote, flat and exact. Black declines pursuit, cites evidentiary value of the witness over the satisfaction of the kill. He blew on the ink. I withdraw a remark I made earlier, Mr. Black. Your grandfather's note was wrong. You are not the clever one pretending to be the foolish one. You are the foolish one who has, tonight, under the worst pressure I have witnessed a wizard endure, chosen to be clever. That is rarer, and it is worth more, and Gringotts will remember it. He rolled the last parchment. We will set the Warrens to watch the drains of Godric's Hollow before dawn. Rats are within our remit. If your friend surfaces, we will know. When it was done, when the parchments were signed and witnessed and sealed and folded back into the impossible black case, Thornback stood and shouldered the case and looked at the young man asleep upright in the broken chair with the baby on his chest, both of them gone under at last into the exhausted dark. He did not wake them. He set one ward at the door, a small green coin of light that would let no living thing across the threshold uninvited, and he wrote a single line in his own book before he disapparated, in the angular goblin script that no wizard at the bank but he could read, and it said, Black S. competent, watch this one. The boy may live. Outside in the dark, a fat gray rat that had been a man ran for the nearest drain and did not stop running, because Peter Pettigrew had heard enough through the floorboards to know that the world he had betrayed everyone to buy had just very quietly refused to be bought. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, Ward and Writ. The cottage had no name when Sirius bought it, which was the first thing he liked about it. And the second thing he liked about it was that it was as far from Grimmauld Place as a man could get and still be in Britain. A low stone house above a Welsh cove, where the only neighbors were sheep, and a lighthouse that had been automated for 30 years, and which Sirius had nonetheless warded as though the Dark Lord might come ashore in a rowing boat. He named it Moonkum because Harriet too could say moon, and could not yet say much else, and a father takes his victories where he finds them. He had not expected the worst part of single fatherhood to be the porridge. You don't have to eat it, Sirius said, with the particular reasonableness of a man who has lost an argument to a person 3 feet tall. I'm not going to make you eat it. I'm just going to sit here and quietly grieve for the 11 minutes of my life I spent stirring it. Harry considered him over the rim of the bowl with the green eyes that were Lily's, set in a face that was already going to be James's, and reached out one deliberate finger and pushed the bowl 6 inches toward the edge of the table and watched it. That's blackmail, Sirius said. That's hostage-taking. I want it on the record that I'm raising a criminal. The bowl went over the edge. Sirius caught it with his wand a half-second before it hit the flags, which was a piece of wandwork that would have got an Auror commendation, levitated it back to the table, set it down, and looked at the boy, who looked back at him with the unmistakable beginning of a grin, and Sirius felt the thing he had been feeling roughly 40 times a day for 14 months, the thing he did not have a clean word for, which was a sort of falling that never landed. Right, he said. Toast, then. We'll tell Andromeda it was a balanced breakfast, and we'll both lie to her face." He had learned that you could lie to most people and not to Andromeda Tonks, who arrived twice a week through the cove fireplace with her daughter on her hip, and an expression that had catalogued the cottage's deficiencies before she had finished stepping out of the grate. She had been a Black before she married Ted, and she had the family's gift for seeing exactly what was wrong with a room, except that in Andromeda the gift had curdled into competence instead of cruelty, and she used it on dust and damp and the appalling state of Harry's left sock rather than on people's souls. "He's not eating," Sirius said as she came through that morning in a swirl of green flame, "and before you start, I tried the porridge, I tried the song, I tried bribing him with a chocolate frog, and I want you to know I'm not proud of that." "He's 2, Andromeda said. 2-year-olds don't eat, they photosynthesize and spite. Nymphadora, don't put that in your mouth, we don't know where the house has been." She set her own daughter down. Dora was 4 and presently turquoise about the hair, a state she shifted into when excited and could not yet shift out of on command, and the 2 children regarded each other with the frank assessment of small people deciding whether the other one was worth the effort. Dora decided yes. She always decided yes. She crossed the kitchen and presented Harry with a wooden hippogriff, and Harry accepted it with the gravity of a head of state receiving a foreign ambassador, and within 90 seconds they were both under the table conducting a war that had no rules Sirius could discern. "They get on," Andromeda observed. "Their family," Sirius said. "He's got family. That was the whole point, wasn't it? That's the thing they were trying to give him." She looked at him then, and she did not say the soft thing, because Blacks did not say the soft thing, but she put the kettle on without being asked, which from Andromeda was a sonnet. There was a thing Sirius did when the porridge had been a disaster and the morning needed saving, which was that he became a dog. He had not told Andromeda the first dozen times, partly because the animagus registration was a separate legal headache he did not need, and partly because the look on her face the day she walked in and found a great black dog the size of a small bear letting a toddler ride it around the kitchen had been worth keeping in reserve. Padfoot had no dignity to lose, which was the entire point. Sirius spent his waking life being careful, being clever, building bricks into a wall around a child, and for 20 minutes a day he got to be a creature whose largest problem was that the boy had hidden the ball again and would not say where. Harry adored him. Harry would say Padfoot before he would say half the words a child his age was meant to have, and would bury both hands in the dog's ruff and laugh the helpless laugh, and Sirius, somewhere inside the dog, would think that the registry could wait, that everything could wait, that he had been a dog in Aszkaban in 900 futures and was a dog in a warm kitchen in this one. And the difference between the two was a goblin and a will and a child who could not yet pronounce his name. The post came at 9, brought by a tawny owl that had learned to wait on the windowsill until Sirius had wards down, and there were 3 letters, and Sirius sorted them the way he had learned to sort everything in the last 14 months, which was by threat level. A bill. A note from Remus, the handwriting careful, the words more careful. They were rebuilding the thing between them one cautious letter at a time. Now that Sirius had shown him the 4th article, now that Remus understood he had been played as surely as Sirius had, and the rebuilding was slow because trust that has been engineered to fail does not unfail on command, but it was happening. And the 3rd letter was heavy parchment, official, sealed with the seal of the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Households, and Sirius held it for a moment before he opened it, the way you hold a thing you already know the weight of. "Andromeda," he said, "what do you know about a woman named Dolar's Umbridge?" Andromeda's hand paused on the kettle. "Junior assistant to somebody in magical law these days, I think. Why? Because she signed a notice of welfare inspection." He read it again because the first reading had been about the shape of it, and the second was about the teeth. Pursuant to a concern raised by an unnamed party regarding the suitability of the present guardian, they're sending someone to inspect the cottage, to inspect Harry, to determine whether he's being adequately cared for by, and I'm quoting, an unmarried wizard of known instability and dark family connection in an unregistered dwelling without supervision. He set the letter down very gently, which was what he did instead of the other thing, unnamed party. "I'll give you 3 guesses who's concerned, and the first 2 don't count." Under the table, Harry laughed at something Dora had done with the hippogriff, a real laugh, the helpless rolling laugh of a small child, and Sirius listened to it and made a decision he had been circling for a year, which was that he was done waiting for them to come to him. "I need to see the solicitor," he said, "today, and I need you to mind Harry because I'm about to stop playing defense." The offices of Quince and Breadwhistle occupied 3 rooms above an apothecary in a part of Diagon Alley that the tourists never reached, and they smelled of old paper and older grievances, and Bartholomew Quince received Sirius in the largest of the 3 rooms, which was not large. He was a narrow man with a narrow face and spectacles that magnified his eyes to the size of small moons, and he had taken the Potter matter, Sirius had come to understand, not out of sentiment of which he had none, but because Gringotts had recommended it, and a recommendation from Gringotts was, to a wizarding solicitor, roughly equivalent to a recommendation from God. "A welfare inspection," Quince said when Sirius had laid the notice on the desk, and he read it twice the way Sirius had, and his magnified eyes moved over it line by line. "Yes, quite. This is the move I anticipated. It is, if I may say so, a competent move, and we should not insult it by treating it as anything less. He cannot take the child by force, the goblin contract forbids it, and Gringotts would treat the attempt as war, which Albus does not want. So he does not take the child by force. He arranges for the state to determine that the child should not be with you, and then the state takes the child lawfully, and Gringotts can do nothing, because Gringotts enforces the will against private persons, not against the crown." He set the notice down. "It is elegant. It uses the one lever the goblins cannot reach." "So what do? We do not defend." Quince folded his hands. "Mr. Black, I have observed in 14 months that you have an excellent instinct which you developed at school. I should imagine breaking rules, and that instinct is, when they come for you, hit back harder than they hit. It served you in corridors. It will serve you here with one modification. We do not hit the inspector. The inspector is a functionary. She is a hand, not a head. We hit the file." He drew a fresh sheet toward him. "An inspection is a proceeding. A proceeding generates a record. A record can be entered into evidence. They are opening a door into the Department of Magical Households, and through that door, Mr. Black, run all the placement orders of the war. Every orphan Albus moved, every household he selected. And somewhere in that filing system, the spectacles caught the light, is the placement order he drew up for Harry James Potter. The one the will forbids, the one that names Petunia Dursley. He never executed it because you took the child first, but he drew it. He drew it before James and Lily were cold, the same night he sealed the ministry will, and a man as careful as Albus Dumbledore does not throw away a document he drew. He files it, and a filed document, he dipped his quill, is discoverable." Sirius sat forward. "The second article, the Dursley placement. The second article is, at present, your dead friend's allegation. An allegation is a feather, but the placement order in his own hand, dated the night of the murders, naming the very household the will forbids, that is not a feather, Mr. Black, that is a brick, and a man who has thrown one brick may be persuaded he is standing under a wall." Quince wrote 3 lines and blotted them. "I will file a countermotion. Their inspection of your household, our discovery of theirs. They want to see whether you keep the child safe. We will ask to see what they intended to do with him. It is the same question pointed the other way, and a Wisengamot clerk who is even slightly fair-minded will grant it, because it is procedurally symmetrical, and procedure is the one god these people still fear. And if the clerk isn't fair-minded, then we need a fair-minded one." Quince looked at him over the moons of his spectacles. "Which brings me to the name I have been saving. You will not like it because she put away 3 of your cousins, but she is the only honest blade in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and she despises an unfair fight more than she despises a black. Amelia Bones." The meeting with Amelia Bones did not take place in an office. It took place, at her insistence, on a bench on the embankment in the Muggle world, where no portrait could overhear and no ministry ward could record, and she came in a Muggle coat that did not suit her and a monocle that did, and she did not shake Sirius's hand. "I'll tell you where I stand," she said, before he had finished sitting down, "so we don't waste an afternoon being charming at each other. I think your family is a stain on this country, and I have spent 11 years removing parts of it from public life, and I would not cross the street to spit on your Aunt Walburga if she were on fire. That's my opinion of the Blacks." She turned the monocle on him. "I also reviewed the file on your supposed crimes the week after Godric's Hollow, because Bartemius Crouch wanted it processed quickly, and I do not process anything quickly. It's the one thing I'm known for, and I found that there was no file. There was a detention order, signed, authorizing your transfer to Aszkaban, pending no trial, pending no charge, pending nothing. A blank space where the evidence should have been with your name written in it." She let that sit. "I have been an officer of magical law for 22 years, Mr. Black, and the thing I cannot forgive, the thing I genuinely cannot forgive, is a punishment that arrives before the proof. So, you want something from me. Say it plainly and I'll tell you whether I'll do it." "The detention order," Sirius said. "The one for Aszkaban, the 4th article. Well, one of the articles in the will is that I was going to be sent there without trial, and that the man who could have stopped it as Chief Warlock didn't. I want that order. I want it entered." I want the whole country to see that they were going to throw me in with the Dementors and never ask me a single question, because if they'll do it to me, they'll do it to anyone, and the only reason it didn't happen is a goblin got to Godric's Hollow 40 minutes before Albus Dumbledore expected anyone to. Amelia Bones was quiet for a moment. A barge went by on the river. You understand what you're asking, she said. That order has Crouch's signature on it. Crouch is the most powerful man in magical law after the minister, and he is the reason the war was won because he fought it like the Death Eaters fought it, which is to say without rules, and the country loves him for it. You want me to make public a document that proves the hero of the war signs people into hell without trials? Yes, Crouch will destroy me, probably. She almost smiled. It was not a warm thing. I appreciate that you didn't lie to me about that. Most petitioners would have promised me it'd be fine. She stood and pulled the bad coat around her and looked down at him. I won't give you the order. I can't. It's the one thing that would end my career before it could do any good, and a dead career protects no one. But I'll tell you something better, Mr. Black, and you can do with it what you like. The order exists in 2 places. The signed copy is in Crouch's vault, and you'll never reach it. But every detention order is logged in the Aszkaban intake register the day it's issued by the warden's clerk, who is required by statute to record the legal basis of every committal, the charge, the trial date, the sentence. It's a dull book, but he reads it, and on the page for the 1st of November 1981, beside your name, in the column marked legal basis, there is, I would wager my monocle, a single word. She fixed him with the monocle. None. Subpoena the register, not the order. The clerk's book is a public record. Crouch can't claim it's privileged. And the word none, written in the warden's own hand the day they meant to take you, is worth 10 of his signatures. Good afternoon, Mr. Black. I was never here. If you tell anyone I gave you that, I'll deny it and I'll have you for slander, and I'll enjoy it. She walked away down the embankment, and Sirius sat on the cold bench in the Muggle world and laughed once, short, because the most honest person in the ministry had just taught him to commit a procedural ambush, and he understood that the war he was in was going to be fought with library books. The matter of Kreacher he had been avoiding for 14 months, and he avoided it because Kreacher lived at Grimmauld Place, and Grimmauld Place was a wound Sirius did not reopen for anything. And because Kreacher had spent Sirius's entire childhood agreeing with Walburga that Sirius was a disappointment, a blood traitor, a stain, and the thought of going back to that house and that voice was worse than the thought of the Dementor. But Quince had said a thing that lodged, that the Black family's deeper instruments, wards, charms, 2 centuries of legal documents that the family had hoarded the way dragons hoard gold, were at Grimmauld Place, and that an heir at war with the cleverest man in Britain could not afford to leave that arsenal locked in a house out of squeamishness. So he went. He took Harry because he would not leave Harry, and because some instinct told him that the house should meet the boy, and he stood in the hall of the place that had made him, and he called the elf's name and waited for the abuse. Kreacher came up from the kitchen with his eyes already narrowed, the bile already loading in his throat, and stopped 3 feet into the hall and looked at the child on Sirius's hip, and the bile died. The blood traitor brings a baby into the house of my mistress, Kreacher began, but his voice had no bottom to it, and his great pale eyes were fixed on Harry, who was looking back at him with the open curiosity of a child who has not yet learned that some beings are supposed to frighten you. This is Harry, Sirius said. He did not perform kindness. Kreacher would have smelled it. He said it the way you state a fact. James Potter's son, Lily's son, he's mine to raise now. They're dead, Kreacher, murdered, and I've come back to this house I hate because I'm raising him alone against people who want to take him, and I need the family's books, and you're the only one who knows where Mother hid them. Kreacher was silent. Harry, with the appalling fearlessness of the very young, leaned out from Sirius's hip and extended one hand toward the elf, not grabbing, just offering, the way Dora had offered the wooden hippogriff, and Kreacher stared at the small hand as though it were a curse he could not identify. Regulus liked babies, Kreacher said abruptly to no one. Master Regulus. When he was small, he was kind to Kreacher. Before, his voice did something Sirius had never heard it do in 30 years, which was crack. Master Regulus is dead. Kreacher does not. Kreacher is not permitted to say how. The locket, the cave. Kreacher could not, and Sirius, who had come for books, who had braced for a fight, found himself crouching down in the hall of his nightmares with his godson on his knee, looking the old elf in the eye and saying, gently, the thing he had never once said to anyone in this house. Tell me, whatever it is. Tell me and I'll help you finish it, not because you serve me. Because he was my brother too, and I let them take him from me without lifting a finger, and I have spent my whole life being sorry I didn't fight for the people in this family who deserved fighting for. So tell me about the locket, Kreacher, and let me help. The elf looked at him for a long, long moment. Then he reached out very slowly and touched one crooked finger to Harry's offered hand, and Harry closed his fist around it and laughed, and something in the house itself seemed to exhale. "Creature," the elf said in a different voice, "will make tea for the heir of the House of Black, and then Creature will show him where the mistress hid the book." And then the pale eyes came up, and there was something terrible and hopeful in them. "Creature will tell him about the locket, and the Dark Lord, and what Master Regulus died to do." It would be 3 years before Sirius understood what Creature had handed him that afternoon, 3 years before the word Horcrux meant anything, 3 years before he stood in a Gringotts vault holding a locket that ate light, and understood that his brother had died fighting the same war from the other end of it. But he understood enough that day to know that he had walked into the house to take and had instead, by accident, by the simple expedient of treating a broken creature as a person, made the most important ally of the entire campaign, because Creature knew where the bodies were buried, all of them, every black secret of 200 years, and Creature had just decided, for the first time in his miserable life, that he was on the side of a black who was worth serving. Remus came to Moonkum a fortnight after the locket, and that was its own kind of inspection, because the two of them had not stood in the same room without a third person to dilute it since before Godric's Hollow, and the fourth article sat between them on the kitchen table like a thing that had to be eaten before either of them could speak. "I read it 40 times, Remus said. He had the look he always had after a full moon, scraped thin, but it was more than that today. The fourth one. Dumbledore holds a debt of secrets over Remus Lupin and used it to set him to watch his friends. I keep waiting to be able to call it a lie. He turned his cup without drinking from it. I can't. Because it's true. He came to me in the spring of '81 and he told me there was a leak, and that he needed someone close to James who could move among my own kind, the packs, that I was uniquely placed, and that if I loved James I'd report everything I saw and ask no questions about why. And I did it. I watched you, Sirius. He had me half believing it was you, because you were the one with the dark family, and meanwhile he had James half believing it was me, because I was the one with the monster in me, and we both went quiet and stopped trusting each other exactly when we needed to trust each other most, and it was him the whole time turning the screws, and I never once asked why a man who claimed to want us united would spend so much effort keeping us apart. Because he didn't want us united, Sirius said. He wanted us managed. United people make their own decisions. He set us against each other so that the only person any of us fully trusted was him. He pushed the teapot aside so there was nothing between them. I thought it was you, Remus. For a year, I let myself think it, and I've hated myself for it every day since I read that article, because it means he reached into the best thing I ever had and rotted it from the inside, and I let him because I was too proud and too frightened to just ask you to your face, so I'm asking now. Not because the will told me to. Were you ever, for 1 second, on his side against James, against the boy? No, Remus said. Never, God, never. Then that's the end of it. Sirius held out his hand across the bare table. He spent a year making us doubt each other. I'm not giving him a second one. You're Harry's Remus' third name on the will after me before the Longbottoms, which means James and Lily trusted you with him over almost everyone alive. I need that to be true again. I need a man in this who isn't a goblin or a solicitor who knew them, who will tell me when I'm being a reckless idiot, which is daily, be his. Remus looked at the offered hand for a moment, the way Creature had looked at Harry's, the way a person looks at a thing they have wanted too long to trust quickly. Then he took it. And from the floor by the dresser, where he had been conducting a campaign against the table legs, Harry chose that exact moment to pull himself upright, wobble and walk 3 whole steps, the first 3 of his life, straight into Remus's knee, where he sat down hard and laughed up at a man he had decided, on no evidence whatsoever, to like. Remus made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite the other thing, and picked the boy up, and Sirius watched the last engineered crack in the Marauders close itself with a child's 3 steps, and thought that Albus Dumbledore, for all his cleverness, had never once in his long life accounted for how much could be rebuilt by people who simply decided to stop letting him win. The inspection came on a Tuesday in March, and Dolar's umbrage came with it. She was smaller than Sirius expected and pinker, and she wore a cardigan the color of a wound that has begun to heal badly, and she smiled the entire time, which Sirius found more chilling than anything his mother had ever screamed, because his mother's hatred had at least been honest. Umbrage's was upholstered. She came into Moonkum with a clipboard and a quill that wrote by itself, and she said, "What a quaint little house," in a voice like sugar poured over a knife, and she began to inspect. She inspected the wards and found them irregular. She inspected the kitchen and found the absence of a house elf a concern for a child of station. She inspected Harry, who was now nearly 3, and who looked at her with the green eyes and declined, with the absolute political instinct of a small child, to come anywhere near her. She wrote, and her self-writing quill scratched, and Sirius let her, because Quince was beside him in his good robes saying nothing, and Quince had told him the entire game was to let her build her record until it was tall enough to push over. And of course, Umbridge said with her widest smile, turning a page, there is the matter of the guardian himself. Mr. Black, you have no wife, no steady situation. A family history that is, shall we say, colorful. The ministry's only concern, our only concern, is the welfare of this poor orphan child who has been through so very much and who deserves stability, security. The kind of safe, loving, ordinary home that a single wizard of, forgive me your reputation, may find it difficult to. Madam Umbridge, Quince said, and it was the first thing he had said in 40 minutes, and it stopped her quill. Forgive me. You have used the phrase safe, loving home 3 times now, and I wonder if you might clarify it for the record, since the record is, as you say, the only thing that matters. Could you describe for the clerk the household the ministry would consider safe and loving, hypothetically? The sort of placement the department would have arranged for this child had the present guardian not existed. Umbridge's smile did not move, but something behind it did. Why an appropriate magical family, or where no such family was available, a suitable arrangement with the child's blood relations, as the law prefers, his blood relations. Quince's magnified eyes were very mild, his mother's sister. A Mrs. Petunia Dursley, of Little Winging, a muggle. I really couldn't say which specific, forgive me again, but I rather think you could. Quince drew a single sheet of parchment from his folder and laid it on the kitchen table between the teapot and the clipboard, and Sirius saw Umbridge's eyes go to it and recognize it, and saw the smile, for the first time, hold itself up by main force. This is a placement order. Department of Magical Households, intake reference of the 1st of November, 1981. It directs that the minor child Harry James Potter be conveyed to the residence of Petunia and Vernon Dursley, number 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, and there established under a blood protection ward, with no further contact from the magical world to be permitted save annual confirmation of his continued residence. It is dated the night his parents were murdered. It is in the hand of Albus Dumbledore. And it was filed, Madam Umbridge, in your department, 2 floors below your office, where my clerk found it on Thursday by the simple act of asking to see it, which, I note, no one had done in 3 years, because no one expected anyone to look. The kitchen was very quiet. The self-writing quill had stopped. The will of James and Lily Potter, Quince went on in the same mild voice, lodged at Gringotts and beyond any wizard's seal, forbids the child being placed with Petunia Dursley by name. Forbids placement with any household selected by Albus Dumbledore by name. The placement order on this table does both. It was drawn the same night by the same hand that sealed the ministry copy of that will, so that no one would read those prohibitions for 30 days, by which time, had a goblin not arrived first, this child would have been behind a muggle hedge with people who, the will states and the mother's own letters confirm, despised everything he is. That is the home, Madam Umbridge, that the department considered safe and loving, a locked cupboard in Little Winging. He squared the parchment. I should like that read into the record of this inspection, since the record is the only thing that matters. Umbridge looked at the parchment. She looked at Quince. She looked for one flat instant at Sirius, and in that instant the upholstery came off and Sirius saw what was under it, which was a small frightened functionary who had been sent to do a great man's dirty work and had just discovered the dirt was on the great man. I shall have to take instruction, she said. Of course, said Quince, take all the instruction you like. But you'll take it knowing that this document now exists in 3 places: the department file, my office, and the memory of Madame Amelia Bones, who reviewed it yesterday in her capacity at magical law enforcement, and who formed, I'm told, certain views about a placement order that contradicts a sealed will sealed by the same hand on the same night. The cat, Madam Umbridge, is some distance from the bag. I'd think carefully about which of these gentlemen you'd rather be seen standing beside when it's fully out. Oh. Umbridge gathered her clipboard and her quill, which would not write any more, and she left through the cove fireplace in a swirl of green that took her pinkness with it, and she did not say goodbye, and she did not come back, and the notice of welfare inspection was, 11 days later, quietly withdrawn in light of new information, which was the closest the ministry ever came to admitting it had been used as a weapon against a child. Quince stayed for tea. He did not often stay for tea. He sat at the kitchen table with Harry, now thoroughly recovered from the pink woman, building a fort out of teaspoons at his elbow, and he said, "That is the foundation. Not one of the 12 articles, strictly, the 12 are accusations about the man, and this is merely proof that the will itself was broken, but it is the slab those 12 will stand on the public record in his own hand. It will not strip him of anything yet. It is one brick. But Mr. Black, and here the solicitor did something Sirius had not seen him do, which was to take off his spectacles so that his eyes shrank to ordinary human eyes, tired and shrewd. When I took this matter, I took it for the fee and the Gringotts' recommendation, and I told myself it was a long defense of a doomed position, a man holding a child against the tide, and that I would be paid whether you won or lost. I have changed my assessment. We are not defending. As of today, there is a document on the public record proving that Albus Dumbledore tried to place this child somewhere a sealed will forbade. There is a register at Aszkaban, which I have, this morning, subpoenaed, that will shortly prove the state meant to imprison you without trial. 2 of the 12 inside 3 years. I no longer think you are holding against the tide, Mr. Black. He put his spectacles back on and his eyes swelled to moons again. I think the tide has begun very slightly to turn. Now, may I have a teaspoon, young man, or is the entire set committed to the war effort? Harry, with enormous seriousness, handed him a single teaspoon. The register came back 6 weeks later, and it came back through the front door of the Wisengamot rather than the back, because Quince had subpoenaed it as a public record, and a public record, once requested, cannot be quietly lost without someone being seen to lose it. The clerk of Aszkaban, a colorless man named Piliwick who had kept the intake book for 30 years and had never expected anyone to read a word of it, was summoned to confirm the page, and Sirius sat in the public gallery with Remus on one side and Quince on the other, and watched the whole machinery of the ministry be made for 10 minutes to look at a single column in a dull book. Mr. Piliwick, Quince said, on the page for the 1st of November, 1981, there is an entry for one Sirius Black committed to Aszkaban that day. Is that correct? It is. And beside each committal your book requires you to record, in the column headed legal basis, the charge, the trial, and the sentence under which the prisoner is held. Is that also correct? It is. Statute requires it. I've never missed a one in 30 years. Then would you read for the assembly, Quince said, what is written in the legal basis column beside the name of Sirius Black? Piliwick put on his spectacles and peered, and there was a silence in the chamber of a particular quality, the silence of 300 people who have suddenly understood that they are about to hear something they will not be able to unhear. It says, Piliwick read, none. A sound went around the chamber. Up on the high seat in robes of midnight blue, Albus Dumbledore sat very still, his hands folded, his face grave and grandfatherly and entirely unreadable, and he did not intervene because there was nothing to intervene against. The clerk was merely reading his own book. But Sirius, watching him, saw the old man's eyes move once to the gallery and find him, and hold, and there was no malice in the look and no apology either, only the steady measuring regard of a chess player who has lost a piece he had not thought to defend, and is already 3 moves into getting it back. Bartemius Crouch was not in the chamber that day, which Amelia Bones had arranged, because Amelia Bones, who had never been there, who would deny everything, had let it be known to exactly one person in the scheduling office that the matter would go more smoothly if certain signatures were elsewhere. The Daily Prophet ran it on page 2 because page 1 was a Quidditch transfer, but page 2 was enough. A word in a book. Was the boy Wholiv's guardian nearly condemned untried? Quince had wanted page 2. Page 1, he said, people argued with. Page 2, people believed. And in 10,000 households the question was asked over breakfast, for the first time, whether the war had been won cleanly, and whether the men who had won it could be trusted to have stopped, and that question, once asked, does not go back in the book. That's the keystone laid, Quince said quietly, as they filed out of the gallery into the cold marble of the atrium. The placement, order, and the register. Neither is one of the 12, the register is not even in the will, but together they prove the 2 things a person must believe before they will believe anything worse. That this man broke the Potters will the night they died, and that the state he lades will cage a wizard with the word none where the evidence should be. Believe those 2, and the 12 stop sounding like a frightened couple's nightmare and start sounding like a pattern. I told you we were no longer defending. That night when the tide was out and the cove was loud below the house and Harry was asleep at last in the small room that had a window facing the lighthouse, because he liked the light, the slow sweep of it, and Sirius had charmed the glass so the beam came in soft and gold, Sirius sat on the floor by the cot the way he did most nights, not because the boy needed him there, but because he needed to be there, and he watched the light go round. And he thought about the word in the Aszkaban register that he had not yet seen, but that Amelia Bones would have wagered her monocle on. None. That was what they had written beside his name, the legal basis for taking everything from him. None. And the only reason it was a word in a book instead of the actual shape of his entire ruined life was that two frightened people had once sat in a goblin's office on the 4th of October and refused, against every counsel, to trust the system that had counseled them. They had named 4 guardians because they did not trust that fewer would survive the choosing. They had named 12 crimes because they did not trust that silence would protect their son. They had been, at the end, exactly as paranoid as a Black, and it had saved everything. The lighthouse beam came round and crossed the cot, and Harry stirred and did not wake, one hand flung up over his head in the boneless sprawl of a child who has never once in his life had a reason to sleep with his fists closed, and Sirius reached out and very lightly so as not to wake him laid 2 fingers against the small warm back, the way Hagrid had in the ruined nursery, the way you touch something made of soap bubbles, and he stayed there on the floor until the tide turned. And he was not afraid, which was a new thing, and he turned it over and over in the dark, getting used to the unfamiliar shape of not being afraid. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, The Heir of 2 Houses. The letter came on a Thursday, addressed in green ink to Mr. H. Potter, the lighthouse room, Moonkum, above the cove, and Harry read the address twice before he read the letter, because the address was the interesting part. "They know which room I sleep in," he said over the toast. He was 11 now, narrow and dark, with his mother's eyes behind glasses Sirius had spent a small fortune charming so they wouldn't break, and he had a way of arriving at the disturbing implication of a thing before he arrived at the thing itself, which Sirius found at once delightful and slightly alarming, the way you find a clever knife delightful. It doesn't say the cottage, it says the room. There's a quill at Hogwarts that writes the address by itself, isn't there? You told me. It knows where every magical child is the moment they're born, so it's known where I sleep my whole life, it just never wrote to me until today. That's one way to read a school letter, Sirius said. It's the way you taught me to read everything. Harry turned the envelope over. You said who knew, and when did they know it, and why did they wait so? Dumbledore's quill has known the exact room I sleep in for 11 years, and the man who reads that quill spent 3 of those years trying to get me out of this house and into a cupboard in Surrey. He set the letter down. I'm not saying don't let me go to Hogwarts. I want to go to Hogwarts. I'm just saying I'd like to walk in knowing the headmaster has had my home address memorized since I was a year old, that's all. It changes the footing. Sirius looked at him across the table, at the boy who had never once been hit, never once been hungry, never once been told he was a burden or a freak or a stain. The boy who had been loved so steadily and so completely for 11 years that it had made him not soft but sharp, because a child who is secure has nothing to spend his cleverness defending and can spend all of it seeing, and felt the falling that never landed, which had not stopped in 11 years and which he no longer expected to. Your dad would have torn the envelope open and asked which Quidditch team the dormitory supported, Sirius said. Your mum would have done exactly what you just did. You got the worst of both of us, I'm afraid. James's hair and Lily's suspicious mind. There's no helping you. He stood and ruffled the impossible hair which produced the usual scowl. Eat your toast, Lord Potter, we're going shopping. Harry went still. Don't call me that. It's true, though. It's true, and you've never said it before, which means today's the day you've decided to start, which means something's happening today that you've been not telling me about for a while. Harry pushed his plate away, the green eyes very level. So, what's at Diagon Alley besides the books? Gringotts, Sirius said. And the truth about what you are, which I've been saving until you were old enough to use it as a weapon and not just carry it as a weight. You're 11, that's old enough, get your coat. He had been giving Harry his coat, in one form or another, for 11 years. Sirius had no model for raising a child. His own parents had raised him the way you season a cauldron, by burning things in it until it stopped reacting, and so he had simply decided, very early, to do the opposite of everything Walburga had done, and the opposite of everything Walburga had done turned out, by happy accident, to be most of what a child actually needs. He told Harry the truth. He told him the truth about his parents, in pieces sized for the age, every year a little more, so that the boy never had to discover his own story from a stranger or a newspaper. He told him the truth about the Blacks, about Aszkaban, about the war, about the man with the half-moon spectacles who had wanted him in a cupboard. And he taught him the way other fathers taught their sons to fish, to ask of every fact the 3 questions. Who knew it? When did they know it? Why did they wait? They had played it as a game when Harry was 6, Sirius hiding a biscuit and Harry reconstructing, from crumbs and footprints and the dog's guilty face, the whole crime, and the game had grown up with the boy until it was not a game but a way of standing in the world. The warmth had come with it, and that was the part Sirius had not planned and could not have planned, because you cannot plan love, you can only refuse to withhold it. There had been the lighthouse window and the slow gold beam. There had been Remus on the full moon weekends, teaching Harry to read the kind of books that took a year, and Andromeda's Sunday dinners loud with Tonks knocking over the gravy. and the summer Sirius had taught him to fly on a cushioning charmed broom 2 feet off the cove grass, and Harry had fallen off 40 times and got back on 41. There had been the nights, more than Sirius could count, when a small voice had come down the corridor after a bad dream, and Sirius had never once said go back to bed, had instead made cocoa at 3 in the morning and let the boy talk until the dream lost its teeth. He had set out to keep Harry safe and had discovered, somewhere around the boy's 4th birthday, that he had also, without meaning to, made him happy, and that a happy child is a fortress no curse can breach because there is nothing in him for the dark to grip. Diagon Alley in August was a river of people, and the river parted around Harry Potter and Sirius Black the way a river parts around a rock, which is to say it pretended not to and could think about nothing else. 11 years had not dulled it. The boy who lived, raised, scandalously, gloriously, depending on which corner of the prophet you read, by Sirius Black, the Black who'd turned, the Black who'd raised the Potter heir in open defiance of Albus Dumbledore and somehow never been stopped. People stared and then pretended they hadn't. A witch dropped a bag of newt eyes. 2 small children were held up to look. Harry walked through it with his chin level and his hands in his pockets, and Sirius watched him do it and recognized the carriage, because it was Lily's, the carriage of a person who has decided that other people's attention is whether to be walked through and not a verdict to be feared. "They look at me like they're waiting for me to do something," Harry murmured. "They are. You're a story they've been telling for 11 years and you've never once shown up to confirm it. Give them a wave. It costs nothing and it ruins their week. They'll spend a month deciding what it meant." Harry waved, a single dry flick of the hand at no one in particular, and a collective sound went through the nearest stretch of the alley, and Harry's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile but was related to one. "There you go," Sirius said. "First lesson of being a public person. The attention is going to happen whether you want it or not, so you may as well aim it." Gringotts received them not in the public hall but through a side door of black marble that Sirius knew and Harry did not, and at the top of a stair that should not have fit inside the building, in an office lined floor to ceiling with ledgers, behind a desk the size of a rowing boat, sat Thornback, 11 years older and not visibly different, with the same half-moon spectacles and the same staff with its uncut garnet leaning in the corner. "Mr. Black," Thornback said, "and Mr. Potter. I last saw you, young man, when you were 9 days old and asleep on your guardian's chest in a house with no roof. You have improved. Sit." He drew a flat case from a drawer, the same impossible flat black case Harry would later swear, and opened it, and it unfolded into a writing desk with a green-shaded lamp. "Your guardian has asked me to conduct your inheritance and heritage assessment, which we perform for any client coming into magical majority or its precursor, and which we have not performed for you sooner because," the spectacles tilted towards Sirius, "your guardian, wisely, did not wish you to grow up as a title. He wished you to grow up as a person and acquire the title afterward as a tool. It is the correct order. Most pureblood families do it the other way and produce exactly the sort of person you would expect. Your hand, Mr. Potter, 3 drops, the instrument does the rest." The instrument was a shallow silver bowl, and Harry, who had inherited his mother's suspicious mind but also her willingness to run the experiment, pricked his finger and gave it 3 drops, and the blood spread across the silver and resolved, the way ink resolves in water, into lines of writing that rose to the surface and held. "Read it aloud," Thornback said, "since the lesson is for you." Harry read, "Harry James Potter, heir to the most ancient house of Potter. By the death of his parents and his attainment of the 11th year, eligible to claim the lordship of the House of Potter with all rights, properties, and seats appurtening thereto." He looked up. "Seats. Continue. Heir to the most noble and most ancient House of Black by designation of the current Lord Black." Harry stopped and looked at Sirius. "That's you. That's me. I named you my heir when you were 3. The black money's foul and the black history's fouler, but the seat's old and the gold spends the same as anyone's, and I'd rather it went to you than to my cousin Bellatrix's idea of a worthy cause." Sirius said it lightly, but his eyes were on the bowl. "Read the last part, Harry, the part about the seats. That's the part we came for." Harry read the last part, and as he read it his voice changed, went flatter and more careful, the way it did when he was assembling something. "The House of Potter holds 1 hereditary seat upon the Wisengamot. The House of Black holds 1 hereditary seat upon the Wisengamot. During the minority of an heir, a hereditary seat may be held in proxy by the heir's magical guardian, who shall vote it in the heir's interest until the heir attains majority." He looked up, and his face had gone very still. "Both houses have a seat. Both seats have been voted by a proxy my whole life. By my magical guardian." The green eyes moved to Sirius. "You're my guardian, so you've been voting them, the Potter seat and the Black seat." "No," Sirius said quietly. "That's the thing, Harry, I haven't." Thornback turned the bowl and the writing shifted and a new column rose, dense with dates. "This," the goblin said, "is the proxy register for the Potter Wisengamot seat for the 11 years of your minority, Mr. Potter. It records who has voted that seat and on what in your name. Your guardian is Sirius Black, but the register does not show Sirius Black. Read the name in the proxy column. Read it for every year." Harry read it. Albus Dumbledore. His voice did not rise. "Albus Dumbledore, Albus Dumbledore. Every year he's been voting the Potter seat, my seat, for 11 years in my name." "And the black seat?" Sirius asked, though he knew. "That one's empty," Harry said, scanning. "Held vacant. Lord Black being attainted by family disgrace, the seat is suspended pending Wisengamot review." He looked at Sirius. "You never reclaimed it." "I tried," Sirius said, 3 times. Each time the petition went to a committee, and the committee never sat, and the committee's never sitting was administered by the office of the chief warlock. The black seat's been suspended for 11 years not because the law suspends it, but because one man's office keeps losing the paperwork that would unsuspend it. Which would be a small thing, an irritating thing, except, he nodded at the bowl. "Show him the 8th, Thornback, show him the rest of it." Thornback inclined his head, and the bowl filled a 3rd time, and now it showed not seats but gold, long columns of it, debits and credits, the slow river of a great family's money across 11 years. "The Potter estate," the goblin said, "during the minority of its heir, is administered by his magical guardian, who may draw upon it for the heir's maintenance and education, with account rendered annually to Gringotts. Mr. Black has rendered account every year. You may see his withdrawals here: school robes, books, the charm on your spectacles, the repairs to the cottage roof, a regrettable quantity of chocolate frogs in the year you were 2. Modest, documented. Now observe the column before his." The lamp brightened. For the period of the 1st of November, 1981, to the moment, some hours later, when I froze this estate against further draw, there is a single withdrawal. It is large. It predates Mr. Black's guardianship by, as it happens, about 40 minutes. And it is drawn under an authority styled in the bank's own record, Magical Guardian of Record, appointed under the Orphans' Wartime Provision Act, APWB Dumbledore. The office was quiet. Down in the public hall a cart rattled away on its rails. "He appointed himself my guardian," Harry said slowly, "the same night my parents died, before Sirius could. And he drew on my parents' money under that authority. And then he sealed the will that would have told everyone he wasn't allowed to." "That is the 7th article," Thornback said, "rendered in figures rather than in your parents' frightened prose. They wrote that he made himself guardian of orphaned order children to control their vaults and futures. Here is the night he made himself yours, and the withdrawal he made before the ink was dry, and the statute he amended to make it legal. The Orphans Act proposed by him, passed in a single sitting in the spring of 1980, which no one read closely because he proposed it, and which contains, in a subordinate clause, the words, "or such other suitable person as the chief warlock shall appoint." He wrote himself a door, Mr. Potter, 2 years before your parents died, and on the night they died he walked through it, and the only thing that closed it again was a contract your parents signed in fear, in this building, over my desk. Thornback closed the bowl. "You asked downstairs 11 years ago, Mr. Black, whether you could win. The 7th article is now a number. The 8th is a number. Numbers do not grieve and cannot be charmed. I told you that the night you signed. I have been keeping the numbers ever since." Harry sat very still for a moment. Then he did the thing that told Sirius, more than anything in 11 years, what kind of man the child was going to be. He did not get angry. He got precise. "Can I claim the Potter seat now?" he asked. "Or do I have to wait for majority?" "You may not vote it until you are of age," Thornback said. "But you may, upon claiming the lordship, name your own proxy in place of the present one. The present proxy holds the seat only so long as the heir does not assert a preference. The moment you assert one, his authority over your seat ends. Then I assert one." Harry's voice was perfectly level. "I want Sirius to vote my seat, not Dumbledore, my guardian, the one that will actually name today if it can be done today." Thornback looked at him over the half-moon spectacles, and there was something in the look that, on a human face, would have been the beginning of respect. "It can be done today," he said. "It requires your blood, your guardian's countersignature, and a filing with the Wisengamot clerk that I will make myself, by hand, this afternoon, so that it cannot be lost by a committee that never sits." He drew the parchment. "You understand what you're doing, Mr. Potter. The man currently voting your seat will receive, by owl before supper, a notice that the Potter seat has been reassigned out of his proxy at the express instruction of an 11-year-old. He will know precisely who taught the 11-year-old to read a ledger. There will be consequences. He is very patient and he plays a long game." "So do we," Harry said. "Sirius told me. Where do I sign?" It was Sirius thought, watching his godson prick his finger a second time and press it to the parchment without being asked twice, the single proudest moment of his life, and he had a lot of competition for the slot. They did the ordinary shopping after, because an 11-year-old who has just stripped the chief warlock of a Wisengamot seat still needs a cauldron and a set of brass scales, and the ordinariness of it was its own small mercy. Robes at Madame Malkin's, where a pale-pointed boy stood on the next fitting stool and talked at length about brooms and bloodlines and the right sort of family, until he arrived, inevitably, at the wrong subject. "My father says it's a disgrace what they let happen to the Potter boy," the pale boy confided, not yet knowing whose hems were being pinned beside his own. Raised by Sirius Black, of all people, a blood traitor and half-mad, they should have given him to a proper wizarding family, someone who understood his position. He looked Harry over with the lazy assessment of a child who has been taught that other children come in grades. "What's your name, anyway?" "You look like you might be all right if you knew the right people to know." "Harry Potter," Harry said, and watched the pale face do several things at once, and felt nothing in particular about any of them, which was, he understood, the whole gift of it. "And the blood traitor who raised me taught me to read a person by what they want, and you want very badly to be told you're the right sort, which means somebody at home only loves you when you are." He said it without heat, almost kindly, which made it land harder. "That's a rotten way to grow up. I had the other kind." "You can keep the brooms and the bloodlines, Malfoy. I wouldn't trade the half-mad blood traitor for the lot." And he turned back to the seamstress, and the pale boy opened his mouth and found, for once in his pampered life, nothing in it, and that silence ended the conversation more thoroughly than any insult could have. A trunk, a telescope. And then Flourish and Blots, which was where Harry met the second most important person of his life, though neither of them knew it, in the section on magical law, where a girl his own age with a great deal of brown hair was reading 3 books at once with the focused ferocity of a person who has discovered that the world contains answers and resents every minute she has spent not knowing them. "You're holding it wrong," she said without looking up as Harry reached for a copy of Wisengamot Procedure, a citizen's guide. "Not the book, the question. You've got the look of someone trying to find out whether a thing that happened to him was legal. I had it for a year about my own, never mind. The citizen's guide is useless. It's written by the ministry. It'll tell you the system works. You want Bramble's annotations, second shelf. It's the one they don't restock because it explains how to actually file things. Actually," and here she did look up and registered the scar and registered the famous face, and to her enormous credit did not gasp or point, but only narrowed her eyes and went on at the same speed. "Actually, if it's a guardianship or a proxy matter, which it is, because you've got the proxy chapter open, you don't want Bramble either. You want the appendix in Greengrass on hereditary seats, because that's the only text that explains the assertion of preference rule, which almost nobody knows about because it's only useful to about 40 families and they like keeping it to themselves. Third shelf, blue spine. I'm Hermione Granger. My parents are dentists. I have no idea what that means here either, but everyone keeps reacting to it, so." Harry looked at her for a moment. "Harry Potter," he said, "I just used the assertion of preference rule about 40 minutes ago to take a seat off the chief warlock." Hermione Granger closed all 3 of her books at once. "You did not. Ask the goblin." "I'm going to need you," Hermione said with the air of a general identifying useful terrain, "to tell me everything in order with dates. I've read about the assertion rule, but nobody's ever actually used it within living memory. The last recorded instance is 1790. It's considered a dead letter. If you've revived a dead letter against Albus Dumbledore, I want to know exactly how, because—" She lowered her voice, glanced at the famous face, and arrived with the speed that would define her at the real point. "Because if one dead letter still works, others might, and the whole reason people like him stay powerful is everyone assuming the old rules are dead when they're only sleeping. That's a theory I've had for about 3 weeks, and you're the first evidence I've found for it. Sit down." "Not you," to Sirius. "No offense, you look like you'll make jokes. He reads ledgers." Sirius, delighted, went to find a copy of Quidditch Through the Ages and left the 2 of them to it. And when he came back 20 minutes later, they had a stack of 7 books between them and a sheet of parchment covered in Hermione's small, fierce handwriting. And Harry had the particular expression of a person who has unexpectedly found someone who runs at his speed, and Sirius thought, That's the other thing James and Lily wanted for him, not just to be loved, to be known. Ollivander's was last, and Ollivander's was strange, the way it was always strange, the old man emerging from the shelves with his pale eyes and his unsettling memory. "Mr. Potter," he breathed. "I wondered, yes, and not in a cupboard after all. The whole alley has talked of nothing else for 11 years. raised by a black of all things, and here you stand, neither cowed nor cruel, which I confess I did not predict. The wand chooses, Mr. Potter. Let us see what chooses you. It took a long time. It always took a long time with the interesting ones. And when at last the holly wand with the phoenix feather sat warm and right in Harry's hand and sent a stream of red and gold sparks across the shop, Ollivander did not smile. He grew very quiet. Curious, he said, curious, curious. I remember every wand I have ever sold, Mr. Potter, and I must tell you this, because you will hear it eventually and better from me than from a frightened whisper. The phoenix whose tail feather sits in your wand gave only one other. Only one, and that wand, its brother, is the wand that gave you that scar. His pale eyes searched Harry's face. 13.5 inches. I sold it a very long time ago to a young man who has since done terrible things. It is a strange and a heavy thing that the wand which marked you and the wand which chose you are brothers. The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter. We must expect great things from you. He did great things, terrible, yes, but great. In the street outside, Harry turned the long, thin box over in his hands, and Sirius watched him do the thing he did, the assembling, and waited. He's not telling me to be afraid of it, Harry said at last. Ollivander, he's telling me there's a connection between me and the thing that killed my parents, and he's watching to see whether I find that frightening or interesting, because that tells him what kind of person I am. He looked up. It's a test. Everything today's been a test. The letter, the staring, the goblin, the wand. Everyone keeps showing me a true thing and watching my face. They've been doing it my whole life, haven't they? Only I'm old enough to catch them at it now. Yes, Sirius said, welcome to it. You'll be tested every day of your life by people deciding what you are. Here's the only thing I've ever learned that's worth passing on. He stopped in the middle of Diagon Alley, in the river of people that still parted around them, and put both hands on his godson's shoulders. You don't have to pass their tests. You only have to know you're being given one. The man who marked you wanted to be great so badly he hollowed himself out for it. And the man who's voted your seat for 11 years wants to be good so badly he's prepared to do terrible things to stay that way. And both of them are going to look at you and see a tool, because that's all either of them has ever really known how to see. You're not a tool, Harry. You're a person, because 2 people died making sure you'd get to be one, and a third spent 11 years backing the bet. Whatever you turn out to be, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Lord Potter, Harry from the Cove, you turn out to be it as a person who was loved. That's the whole inheritance. The seats and the gold are just paper. Harry looked at him for a long moment, with the green eyes in the middle of the staring street, and then he did a thing he had not done in public in years, because he was 11, and it was undignified. He stepped forward and put his arms around Sirius and held on, hard, the way he had held the collar in the ruined nursery before he had any memory to keep it in. And Sirius held him back, and the river of people slowed and stared, and for once Sirius did not care what story they were telling, because the story was true. They nearly made it out of the alley clean, and then a voice said, "Watcher, Sirius," with enormous cheer, and a young woman with violently pink hair and oars, robes a size too big, detached herself from the crowd outside Quality Quidditch Supplies, and very nearly took out a rack of clean sweeps doing it. Nymphadora Tonks was 20 now and 3 months into Auror training, and she still went pink about the hair when excited and still could not get through a doorway without paying a toll to it, and she seized Harry by both shoulders and looked him over the way a cousin does. "Look at you," she said. "Last time I minded you, you were sick on my one good shirt. Now you've gone and got tall and clever-looking, which is worse, frankly. Give me the sick any day." She glanced at Sirius and dropped her voice, and the cheer in it banked down into something steadier. "Mum owled. She said you'd been to the bank and that there'd be a letter going round the ministry by tonight with a certain name on it, and that I should expect the Auror office to get very interesting very fast." The pink dimmed a shade toward a thoughtful brown. "Is it true?" "Did he really take the Potter seat back off the old man?" "He really did," Sirius said. Tonks looked at Harry with frank delight. 11 years old and you've already done something half the Wisengamot's too scared to try. Right, cousin to cousin, before I'm an Auror and have to pretend to be impartial about everything. If you ever need someone inside the ministry who owes this family more than she owes that office, you owe me a chocolate frog and we're square. She straightened and the hair flushed pink again. Now I've got to go fail a stealth and tracking exam by walking into a broom rack in front of 40 people, so. Welcome to the war, Harry. The blacks who turned out all right have to stick together. There's only about 4 of us and 2 are children. And she went, leaving a wobbling rack of brooms and a boy looking after her with the particular warmth of a child who has just understood again how wide his family actually is. "She's my cousin," Harry asked. "Second cousin once removed, and the only good thing my Aunt Andromeda's branch ever know. That's not fair. The whole branch turned out fine. That's why the family disowned them." You come from people, Harry, not many of them, and most of the dead ones were dreadful, but the living ones are yours. Sirius steered him on toward Ollivanders. Remember that when you're sorted and some pureblood tells you a Potter raised by a Black has no proper family. You've got a metamorph magus Auror, a werewolf, a goblin who likes you, a solicitor who'd commit crimes for you and me. Match that, Malfoy. The meeting with Dumbledore happened the way these things happened, which was to say it happened by accident that was not an accident. They were in the leaky cauldron, waiting out a rain shower before fleeing home, and Harry had gone to the counter for 2 butterbeers. And when he came back there was an old man in half-moon spectacles sitting at their table, in robes of deep violet, with his hands folded and his blue eyes kind, and Sirius was sitting very still opposite him, with the look of a man who has decided not to draw his wand in a public room with his godson present. "Ah, Harry," Dumbledore said warmly, as though they were old friends, as though he had not voted the boy's seat for 11 years and lost it that afternoon. "Forgive an old man's curiosity. I have wanted to meet you properly for a very long time, and our paths have been kept apart by circumstance. You have your mother's eyes. People will tell you that until you are sick of it, and they will be right every time, and it will never stop being true." He gestured at the empty chair. "Sit, please. I shan't keep you from your butter-beer. I only wish to say before you come to my school that whatever you have been told of me, and you have been told a great deal, I have no doubt, some of it even fair, you will find that Hogwarts itself bears me no opinion. It is simply a school. You will be safe there, you will be taught there. And if ever you find yourself in difficulty, my door is open to you always, regardless of what stands between your guardian and myself. A boy should not inherit his elders' wars." Harry set down the 2 butterbeers. He did not sit. He looked at the old man with the green eyes, and Sirius watched him assemble it, the whole shape of it, in about 4 seconds. "You voted my seat for 11 years, Harry said pleasantly. "You drew on my parents' vault the night they died. You signed an order to put me in a cupboard with people who hated my mother. And about 3 hours ago I took my seat back, which means you got an owl about it before supper, which means you came here tonight knowing you just lost it to me, and you sat down at my table and told me a boy shouldn't inherit his elders' wars." He picked up his butterbeer. "That's very good. That's genuinely very good, the bit about a boy shouldn't inherit his elders' wars, right after I took something off you, so that if I'm cold to you it looks like I'm the one carrying the grudge, and you're the kind old man who rose above it. Sirius warned me you'd be the best at this." He wasn't exaggerating. Dumbledore's expression did not change, but something behind the blue eyes settled and grew very attentive, the way a chess player grows attentive when the child across the board makes a move that was not in the book. "He raised you well," the old man said quietly, and for once there was no performance in it at all. It was simply true, and it cost him something to say, and he said it anyway. "Better than I believed he could. I did not think it possible to raise a child in the shadow of all this, and have him come out neither frightened nor cruel. I was wrong. I am old enough to admit when I have been wrong about a thing, Harry, though I will tell you it is a short list, and you are now on it." He rose, a small violet figure, and inclined his head to Sirius with a courtesy that had steel all the way through it. "I will see you both at the school, I expect, more than either of us would like. Sirius. The seat was always going to be his, I was merely keeping it warm. Tell yourself that, if it helps. It even happens to be partly true." He moved toward the door and paused and looked back, and the kindness on his face was real, and the warning under it was real, and they did not fight. "He is everything they hoped, Sirius. Guard that. Things that are everything one hoped tend, in this world, to be needed for something. Good evening." And he went out into the rain, and Harry sat down at last and drank his butterbeer and was quiet for a while. "He said the last bit to frighten you," Harry said eventually. "Things that are everything one hoped tend to be needed for something. He wants you lying awake wondering what I'll be needed for." "It worked," Sirius admitted. "I'll be lying awake for a week." "Then we'll find out what I'm needed for," Harry said, "before he can use it, and we'll take that off him too, the way I took the seat. That's the whole game, isn't it? Find the true thing before he can spend it." He looked at his godfather over the butter-beer, the green eyes steady, 11 years old and entirely unafraid. "You've been finding the true things my whole life, so I wouldn't have to. I think it's my turn to start helping." They flew home to Moonkum through the rain, and Remus was there, and Quince came by the cove fire an hour later with his folder and his moon-sized spectacles, because the proxy filing had landed at the Wisengamot clerk's office at 4, and the wizarding world had begun, very quietly, to vibrate. They sat around the kitchen table where 11 years of this campaign had been planned, and Harry sat with them, which was new, and no one suggested he shouldn't. "The reassignment is clean," Quince said. Thornback filed it by hand. It cannot be lost. As of this evening, the Potter seat votes with its guardian, which is to say with you, Mr. Black, which is to say, and this is the part the prophet will reach by Friday, that for 11 years the chief warlock has been casting a vote that was never lawfully his to cast the moment the rightful guardian objected, and the rightful guardian objected 3 times in writing, and was answered by a committee that never sat. That is no longer your private grievance. That is a procedural scandal with a paper trail, and procedural scandals are the only kind this country still punishes. He laid a sheet on the table. I intend to refile the Black Seat petition tomorrow, through the same hand delivery channel, so it cannot be buried. 2 seats, Mr. Black. If we recover both, you sit on the Wisengamot with 2 votes and a story, and a man with 2 votes and a story can begin to demand the one thing Albus has spent 30 years preventing, which is an audit of the chief warlock's office. And the school, Remus asked quietly. He'll have Harry 6 days a week for 10 months. Whatever he can't do through the law, he'll do through proximity. Kindness in a corridor, a quiet word after class. He's very good at being the only adult who seems to understand a lonely child. Then we make sure Harry isn't a lonely child, Sirius said, which Merlin help us, I think we've managed. He looked at his godson. You met a girl today who reads faster than Quince. You've got a cousin in the Aurors. You walk in already knowing what the place is for. He can't be the only adult who understands you, Harry, because you're not starting from nothing the way the lonely ones do. That's the whole defense. He recruits the unloved. You're the worst recruited child in Britain. Harry turned his new wand over in his hands. He told me his door's always open, in the leaky. He said a boy shouldn't inherit his elders' wars. He says that to everyone he wants, Remus said. It's the truest sounding lie he tells because there's a real kindness in it. He genuinely doesn't want you to suffer. He only wants you to suffer for the right reasons at the right time in the right cause. That's the part you have to hold on to when he's being warm at you, and he will be warm at you, and it'll feel good, because loneliness isn't your weakness, but being understood is everyone's. He met the boy's eyes. Let him be kind to you, take the kindness. Just never forget it's also a deposit he intends to withdraw. Harry nodded slowly, filing it the way he filed everything. Find the true thing before he can spend it, he said. Sirius told me that today too. You all keep telling me the same thing in different words. That's because it's the only thing, Quince said, gathering his folder, and we are all, in our various ways, very tired men who learned it too late. You're learning it at 11. That, Mr. Potter, is the single greatest advantage anyone in this room has ever handed an opponent of Albus Dumbledore, and it was handed to you by 2 people who died doing it. Use it well. Now I must go. I have a black seat to resurrect and a great deal of toast to not be offered, since no one in this house has ever once offered me supper, and I have decided, after 11 years, to stop hinting. Sirius, laughing, made him stay for supper. Outside, the rain came down on the cove, and somewhere across London an old man in violet robes walked through the wet streets composing his next several moves, and a girl named Hermione Granger sat up in a hotel room with 7 library books making a list of dead letters that might only be sleeping. And on the 1st of September a train would leave from a platform that most of the world could not see, carrying a boy who had been loved into the one place his enemy had built to shape him. And the boy would walk in knowing exactly what the place was for, which changed, as he had said over the toast, the entire footing. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, The Trapdoor Argument. The sorting hat had been on Harry's head for the better part of a minute, which was long enough that the hall had begun to murmur, and it was using the time to argue. Difficult, said the small voice in his ear. Very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see, and a temper held on a tight rein, which is rarer and worth more. A good mind, a very good mind, and trained, which I almost never see. Someone has taught you to think and not merely to know. An ambition, oh yes. You want things, Harry Potter, and you have already learned to get them. You took a Wisengamot seat off the chief warlock before you'd unpacked your trunk. You do well in Slytherin. You do very well. It would help you toward greatness, and there is greatness in you, the kind your enemy would recognize. You sort by what people are, Harry said under his breath, or by what they want, by a great many things. Why? Because if you sort me into Slytherin, I learn that being clever and ambitious makes me suspect that I belong with the house everyone's already decided is rotten, and I spend 7 years proving I'm not what my surname and my scar say I am. And if you sort me into Gryffindor, I get to be brave and clever in the house no one's frightened of, and I get to make the point that those 2 things were never opposites, that a person can think like a Slytherin and choose like a Gryffindor, which is exactly the thing the man at the high table doesn't want anyone believing, because his whole power runs on people staying in the boxes he sorts them into. Harry kept his voice level. You're a thinking hat. You've watched 1,000 years of this. Tell me I'm wrong. The hat was quiet for a moment, and when it spoke again there was something in its dry voice that might, on a face, have been amusement. "You are not wrong. You are in fact the first child in a long time to argue with me about the politics of the thing rather than begging for a house. Your mother begged for Gryffindor, your father never doubted it. You reasoned your way there, which is, I suppose, its own kind of answer. Very well, be where you have decided to be. But know that I have not done you a kindness, only granted you a strategy, and there is a difference, and you of all the children in this hall already know it. Gryffindor." The table on the left erupted, and Harry took the hat off and walked to it through the noise, and slid in beside a red-haired boy who had been sorted 3 minutes earlier and who was looking at him with frank awe, and across from a girl with a great deal of brown hair who had been sorted before that, and who was not looking at him with awe at all, but with the focused expression of a co-conspirator confirming that her asset had arrived in position. "You took a Wizengamot seat off Dumbledore," Hermione Granger said very quietly under the cover of the cheering. "You actually did it. I checked the clerk's bulletin on the train. It's posted. It's real. Ronald, move up. This is important. Harry, we are going to have so much to do." The red-haired boy, Ron Weasley, looked between them with the expression of a person who has sat down at what he thought was a normal table and discovered it was a war room. "Blimey," he said with feeling, and Harry decided on the spot that he liked him, because a person who says blimey and stays is a more useful person than one who is impressed and leaves. The first letter from Sirius arrived at breakfast the next morning, and it arrived not by a discreet owl, but by the largest eagle owl the school had seen in years, which landed in the porridge of a second year and delivered, to the entire Gryffindor table, a howler. Harry said his godfather's voice, magically amplified to fill the great hall, magnificently unbothered by the 400 people now staring, "I am informed you were sorted into Gryffindor. This is a disaster. Your mother was a Gryffindor and SHE was insufferable about IT for 7 years. I had hoped you'd break the family curse and pick a house with a decent common room and fewer stairs. Instead you've gone and become a lion, which means I have to be proud of you in public, which I find deeply undignified." The howler paused, and when it resumed the bellow had dropped into something the whole hall had to lean forward to hear, which was, Harry understood at once, exactly the point. "I am proud of you, I'm proud of you every single day, and I'm going to keep being proud of you out loud where everyone can hear it, because somewhere in this castle is a man who recruits children by being the only adult who seems to notice them, and I want it on the record at top volume that you are noticed. You are noticed at breakfast. You are noticed across an entire country. Write to me tonight, or I'll send a worse one tomorrow. Love," and this is the part I want the staff table to hear most clearly, "love, your godfather." The howler tore itself up, and the hall sat in stunned silence, and up at the staff table Albus Dumbledore was buttering a piece of toast with the serene attention of a man who has just been sent a message and has decided to let everyone watch him receive it. "He does know," Ron said faintly, "that howlers are meant to be for telling you off." "He knows exactly what they're for," Harry said, and pulled his own breakfast toward him, and did not look at the staff table, because he had been raised by a man who had taught him that the way you win the staring contest is to be the one who isn't playing. He's just decided to use it for the opposite, pass the marmalade. Sirius came to the school in October because he could, and because the fact that he could was itself the point. A legal guardian with a seat on the Wizengamot has a statutory right to visit a minor ward in term time, on reasonable notice, in a manner not disruptive to instruction. Quince had found the clause, dusted it, and served it on the school like a writ. So Sirius arrived on a Saturday in a coat the color of a thundercloud and was received, with immaculate courtesy and visible reluctance, in a side room off the entrance hall, and Harry got 2 hours of his godfather in the middle of a term, which no other first-year got, and which Harry understood was a gift wrapped inside a tactic. "I wanted to see the place that's trying to recruit you," Sirius said, dropping into a chair and propping his boots on a footstool that had probably belonged to a founder. "Also, I wanted Dumbledore to have to sign a form acknowledging my legal standing. He did it himself, you know. Came down to the entrance hall, signed it with that lovely sad smile, told me I was always welcome. I told him I knew I was always welcome. That was the trouble. A man who's always welcome never gets to feel he's gotten away with something." He grinned. "How are you, really? Not the letters, the real answer." "I'm happy," Harry said, and watched his godfather hear it and watched it land. "That's the strange part. He's playing a game with me the whole time, and Snape hates my face, and there's something behind a forbidden door, and I'm happy anyway because I've got Ron and Hermione and I know exactly what everything is. You did that. You made it so the worst the cleverest man in Britain can do to me is annoy me." Sirius was quiet for a second, which was rare. "Your dad said something like that to me once," he said. "First year, we were in a boat." He said, "Isn't it brilliant? We get to be here and be us. I've spent 11 years trying to give you the being us part, because the being here part was always going to happen." He cuffed Harry lightly round the head, the old gesture. "Don't tell me you're happy too often. I'll get sentimental, and I have a reputation to protect. Now, show me this forbidden corridor everyone's writing to me about, not to go in, just so I know which door to be furious about later." The trouble with Hogwarts, Harry discovered over the following weeks, was that it was wonderful, and that the wonderfulness was the trap. The moving staircases and the ghosts and the way the ceiling of the great hall held the weather, it was the most marvelous place he had ever been, and it had been built, in part, to make children love it so completely that they would never quite be able to believe anything bad about the man who ran it. He understood the architecture of the feeling because Sirius had taught him to, and understanding it did not make it any less effective, which was its own lesson. You can know a thing is designed to charm you and be charmed anyway. He learned to hold both at once. He loved the castle. He watched the headmaster. The headmaster watched back, but lightly, the way a gardener watches a seed. Dumbledore did not summon Harry or single him out. He did something cleverer. He was simply occasionally present. A kind word in a corridor about Harry's flying which had reached him somehow. A pause by the Gryffindor table to ask, with apparently genuine interest, whether Harry was settling in. The loan, through Professor McGonagall, of a book Harry had mentioned wanting, a small kindness perfectly judged, the kind of thing a lonely child would have treasured as proof that the great man saw him. Harry took the book. He read it. He wrote Sirius a 4-foot letter about it, ending it has a strings. "He wants me grateful. I'm filing the gratitude where I file everything," and Sirius wrote back, "Good, that's exactly right. Take every kindness and bank none of the debt." And somewhere in the exchange, Harry understood that he and his godfather were, between them, running a counterintelligence operation against the most powerful wizard in Britain, and that they were, improbably, winning. Because they had the one thing Dumbledore had never been able to manufacture in any of his recruits: a child who went home, in his letters, every single night, to someone who loved him without an agenda. Severus Snape was a different kind of weather. The potions master loathed Harry on sight, loathed him with a depth and specificity that puzzled Harry until Hermione, 3 weeks in, looked up from a library book and said, Oh, that's interesting. Harry, has anyone ever told you that you look like your father, constantly?" "Why?" "Because Professor Snape was at school with your parents. I found him in an old prophet, a dueling tournament, 1976, and the way he looks at you isn't the way you look at a stranger you've decided to dislike. It's the way you look at a ghost you have unfinished business with. He's not seeing you, he's seeing your father. Which means," and here she did the thing, the leap, the cite and conclude, "which means he has history with your family that goes back to school, and people with old history are people who know old things, and we are looking for old things, Harry. We're looking for who knew what in 1981. Snape was an adult then." "Snape was. I checked the Death Eater trial records. They're public. Did you know they're public? No one ever reads them. Snape was tried as a Death Eater and walked free because Albus Dumbledore personally vouched for him." She closed the book. "A Death Eater, vouched for by Dumbledore, teaching at the school. That's not a coincidence. That's a debt, and a debt that size has a shape, and the shape is going to tell us something." It told them something 6 weeks later, and it told them by accident, which was the only way these things ever came, because you could not search for a secret directly, you could only arrange to be standing where it fell. Harry had taken to spending his free hours in the section of the library that dealt with prophecy, not because he expected to find anything. Hermione had established that the actual prophecies were kept in the Department of Mysteries, sealed, unreadable except by those they named, but because Ollivander's words in the wand shop had lodged in him, and because his parents had spoken of a prophecy in its first 2 articles. And because Sirius had taught him that the questions you cannot answer are the ones worth sitting near. He was reading a dull book on the history of Sears when Quince's owl arrived with the monthly campaign letter, and the campaign letter contained a single line that changed the year. "I have located," Quince wrote, "a witness to the first 2 articles. Her name is Sybil Trelawney, and she is, as of this term, on the staff of your own school, teaching divination in the North Tower. She is the granddaughter of a famous seer, and she is generally held to be a fraud, which is precisely why no one has ever thought to ask her the one question that matters, what she prophesied to whom, and who was listening at the door. Madame Marchbanks of the Wisengamot, who examined your guardian in his NEWT. And who has loathed Albus since he reorganized the examination board without consulting her, has agreed to take a sworn statement, in her capacity as an officer of the Wisengamot, from any witness you can produce. Produce Trelawney, carefully. She does not know what she is sitting on, and the moment Albus realizes you are reaching for her, she will be reassigned, retired, or simply kindly made to forget. You have, I would estimate, a narrow window. Use the girl, the Granger one. This wants a soft approach, and you are, forgive me, a blunt instrument like your guardian. The soft approach took Hermione 3 weeks and a great deal of tea. She befriended Sybil Trelawney the way she befriended everything, by taking it seriously when no one else would, attending divination with apparent reverence, asking the lonely woman in the tower about her famous grandmother, about her gift, about the great prophecy that every seer dreams of making once, and that Trelawney in her cups confessed she had made once, years ago, in an interview for a teaching post in a room above a pub, and could not remember a word of. Because true prophecy passes through the seer and leaves nothing behind. An interview, Hermione reported back, fierce and quiet, in the corner of the common room where they held their councils, in a room above a pub. She made a real prophecy, she's certain it was real. She came out of the trance and Dumbledore's face had changed, she says. He looked at her as though she'd handed him a live coal and she can't remember it. But that's not the part. Harry listened to the part. She gripped his arm. She says the interview was at the Hog's Head, and she says that partway through there was a commotion outside the door, and Aberforth, that's the barman, Dumbledore's own brother, threw someone out who'd been caught listening at the keyhole. Someone who'd been eavesdropping on her prophecy. She never saw who, but Dumbledore did. Dumbledore was in the room, and Aberforth caught the listener, and Dumbledore saw exactly who had been at that door. The first article, Harry said slowly. He altered the Hog's Head records to conceal that the prophecy was overheard by a servant of the enemy, the servant at the door. Snape, Hermione breathed. It has to be Snape. He was a Death Eater. He overheard a prophecy about you, about your family. That's why Voldemort came for you specifically. Somebody told him. Somebody carried that prophecy to him. Snape carried it. Snape overheard it at the door and carried it to Voldemort, and that's why your parents died, and Dumbledore knew. Dumbledore knew the night it happened that his own future employee had handed your family's death sentence to the Dark Lord, and he covered it up, and then he vouched for the man in court, and then he hired him. She sat back pale. That's not one crime, Harry, that's the whole engine. That's why the first 2 articles are about the prophecy. Your parents found out. Somehow before they died, they found out that Dumbledore was protecting the man who doomed them, and they put it in the will, and they couldn't prove it, but we can, Harry said. If we can get Trelawney's sworn statement that the prophecy was overheard, and Aberforth's that he threw a listener out, and the Hog's Head record that was altered to hide it, we can put the door listener in that room on the record. We don't even have to name Snape yet. We just have to prove that Dumbledore knew in 1980 that the prophecy that got my parents killed had been overheard by the enemy's side and told no one whose life it touched. Articles 1 and 2. The whole engine, like you said. He stood. I need to write to Quince and Sirius tonight before the window closes. The window closed faster than even Quince had feared, because the next morning Sybil Trelawney announced to her third-year class vaguely that she would be taking a short leave for her health, on the advice of the headmaster, who was so very thoughtful, and Hermione went white and Harry understood that they had been seen. But they had moved first by a day. Marchbanks had taken the statement the previous evening, by emergency flew, in her capacity as a Wisengamot examiner with the legal standing to record sworn testimony, and Aberforth Dumbledore, who hated his brother with a clean, ancient, sibling hatred that 30 years had only aged into something finer, had not needed to be persuaded at all. He had been waiting, it turned out, the better part of a decade, for someone to finally ask him who had been at that door. It is on the record, Quince wrote, in a letter that arrived with the weight of a verdict, sworn before Madame Marchbanks, that a true prophecy was made at the Hog's Head in 1980, that a listener was caught at the door by the barman and ejected, that Albus Dumbledore was present and saw the listener's face, and that the inn's record of guests for that night was, when I subpoenaed it this week, found to have one line scratched out and rewritten, in an ink that the Gringotts forgery assiers date to within a year of the event, not to the night itself. Article 1, proven. He altered the record to conceal who heard the prophecy. Article 2 follows it like a shadow. He knew the prophecy concerned the Potters, and he chose what to tell them and what to keep, and he kept the most important thing of all, which was that the enemy had heard it too. Your parents died inside the gap between what Albus knew and what Albus said. We have now measured that gap, Mr. Potter, and entered the measurement into the law. That is 2 more. By my count, it brings us to 4 of the 12 proven on the record, and the year is not yet out. Harry read it twice, and then he did the thing he always did with the worst news, which was to go and find the people who loved him, because Sirius had taught him that grief shared is grief halved, and grief hoarded is grief that goes bad. He wrote a long letter to his godfather that night, and at the end of it, after all the legal triumph, he wrote the true thing underneath. He let them die, and then he was kind to me about it. He sat at the high table being kind to me about it for 3 years. I keep thinking about that, and Sirius wrote back by return owl in the small hours. I know, I think about it every day. Here's the only thing that helps. They wrote the will. At the very end, frightened, hunted, they sat in a goblin's office and made a weapon out of the truth so that one day a son they'd never see grown could put it in the law. That's not a story about how he won, Harry. That's a story about how they reached 11 years past their own deaths and handed you the means to win. Come home for Christmas, creatures threatening to make a goose. We'll read the will together, all 12 out loud, and we'll cross off the ones we've proven, and you'll see how far we've come. 4 of 12. They'd be Merlin, Harry, they'd be so proud they'd be unbearable. I'm unbearable enough for all 3 of us. Come home. There was Quidditch too, because there is always Quidditch, and Harry turned out to have inherited the one thing of his father's that required no cleverness at all, which was the ability to sit on a broom as though he had been poured onto it. He made the house team as a first year, which had not happened in a century, and his first match was in November against Slytherin. And Sirius came, of course Sirius came, with Remus beside him and a banner that said Potter in letters 6 feet high and a second banner, smaller, that he unrolled only when McGonagall was looking the other way, that said and he's better looking than his father, which I never thought I'd say. Harry caught the snitch in 11 minutes. He nearly swallowed it first, in the canonical family fashion, a broom length above the Slytherin seeker with the whole stadium screaming, and he pulled out of the dive with the gold thing fluttering in his fist and looked, before he looked anywhere else, before he looked at his own team thundering toward him up into the stands, to the one spot he had found before the match even started, where a black-haired man and a sandy one were on their feet making a noise that a stadium of 1,000 people could not drown out. It was not the catch that he kept afterward when he was old, it was that, the looking up and the finding them there. He had been raised by a man who had never once in 11 years failed to be in the stands, and so Harry did the thing on a broom that his father had done on a broom, but he did it as a person who knew, with total certainty, exactly where to look when it was over, and that certainty was the whole inheritance, the part that mattered, the part no amount of natural talent could have given a lonelier boy. Your dad caught his first snitch in 9 minutes, Sirius told him that night, over contraband cake in the side room a guardian was entitled to. So you're 2 minutes slower than James, and I want you to carry that failure with you all your life. He was grinning so hard it looked painful. I'm joking, you were perfect. You were so perfect I had to pretend I had something in my eye in front of Remus, who will never let me forget it. 11 years, Harry. I used to hold you on this exact broom 2 feet off the cove grass and you'd fall off and laugh. And today 1,000 people watched you fly, and the only thing I could think the whole time was that your mum and dad would have been so loud. They'd have been so embarrassingly, gloriously loud. I tried to be loud enough for all 3 of us. I think I pulled something. Christmas was a goose in the end, and the goose was a triumph, because Creature had decided that the heir of the House of Black bringing his Hogwarts friends home for the holidays was an event the family had not seen in a generation and had cooked accordingly. Moonkum filled up. Remus came, scraped thin from the December moon but steady. Andromeda and Ted came, and Tonks, who had passed her stealth exam on the 3rd attempt, and changed her hair to gold for the occasion, and knocked over the goose gravy within 9 minutes of arriving, to general applause. Hermione came for 2 days, her dentist parents having been charmed by Sirius into believing the cottage was an ordinary boarding school friend's house, which it was, if you ignored the talking portrait in the hall and the house elf who kept trying to iron Hermione's homework. Ron could not come, 6 Weasleys was a Christmas of its own, but he sent Harry a hand-knitted jumper from his mother, who had heard about the boy with no parents being raised by the scandalous Black and had simply, without asking, added him to her wool. And Harry put it on and did not take it off for 3 days, because a stranger's mother knitting you into her family is the kind of thing that gets past every guard a person has. On Christmas night, when the others had gone to bed and the tide was loud below the house, and the lighthouse swept its slow gold beam across the kitchen, Sirius took down the will. Not the Gringotts original that lived in the bank beyond any fire, but the certified copy Thornback had made, the one they read on nights like this, and Sirius spread it on the kitchen table between the candle stubs and the goose bones, and Harry sat beside him and Remus across, and they read the 12 articles aloud the way other families read stories, taking turns, and as they read each one that had been proven, Sirius drew a line beside it, not crossing it out but underlining it. Because a proven thing is not erased, it is confirmed. The 7th underlined the self-appointed guardian, proven in a ledger. The 8th underlined the unaccountable fund, proven in figures. The 1st underlined the altered Hogshead record. The 2nd underlined the prophecy withheld, 4 lines, gold in the candlelight, 4, Harry said, and the year's not even out. They sat in a goblin's office, Sirius said quietly, his finger resting on Lily's copper plate, 10 weeks before they died, and wrote these in fear, certain they'd never see one of them answered. And here we are, you and me, in a warm house with the goose finished and your friends asleep upstairs, underlining their accusations in gold. He looked at his godson across the candles. I used to think the best thing I ever did was carry you out of that house. I've changed my mind. The best thing I ever did was make you into someone who'd want to finish what they started, not out of hate. You've never once done a thing out of hate. That's the part that would have killed them with pride, but because the truth's worth proving and you're the kind of person who proves things. Happy Christmas, Lord Potter, 4 of 12. Your parents are unbearable about it, wherever they are. I can feel it from here. Harry put his head on his godfather's shoulder, 11 years old and entirely unafraid, and they sat in the gold sweep of the lighthouse and did not say anything else for a long while, because some things do not need saying when the people who would say them already know. The stone was the other thing, and the stone was the thing that nearly killed him, and it nearly killed him not through any failure of his own, but through a feature of the castle so brazen that Harry spent months refusing to believe it was deliberate. There was a corridor on the 3rd floor that was forbidden. The headmaster had announced it at the start of term feast to the whole school, in so many words, that the right-hand corridor on the 3rd floor was out of bounds to everyone who did not wish to die a very painful death. And inside that corridor, Harry and Ron and Hermione discovered over the course of the year, more or less by being 11 and therefore constitutionally unable to leave a forbidden door alone, there was a 3-headed dog standing on a trapdoor, and beneath the trapdoor there was a sequence of obstacles, a strangling plant, a room of flying keys, a chess set that played for keeps, a logic puzzle of potions, and beneath all of those there was the thing the obstacles guarded, which was the Philosopher's Stone. Removed from Gringotts for safekeeping and brought, by Albus Dumbledore, into a school full of children. He told the whole school it was here, Harry said in the council corner with the campaign-trained part of his mind running cold and clear. He told us not to go in. Hermione, what's the first thing you do to an 11-year-old if you want him to go somewhere? You tell him not to, Hermione said slowly. And the obstacles, the keys, the chess, the potions riddle, who can get through those? Harry laid it out the way he laid out a ledger. Flying, that's a first-year flying lesson. Chess, Ron's the best in the year. A logic puzzle that's solved by reading carefully, that's you. A plant you beat by staying calm in the dark, that's any Gryffindor with their nerve. Sirius taught me to ask who a thing is shaped for. This whole course isn't shaped to keep people out. A grown wizard would just blast the dog and burn the plant. This is shaped to be just barely passable by 3 clever 11-year-olds working together. It's not a vault, Hermione, it's an exam, and we're the students it was set for. The room was very quiet. He brought a thing the most dangerous wizard alive wants, Harry said, into a school, announced where it was, dared us not to look, and built an obstacle course sized exactly for children. That's the 6th article. He places people in danger he could prevent to test them and calls it the price of war. Only this time the people are us, and the test is whether the famous orphan will walk into the trap his enemy is also walking into, so the great man can see what the famous orphan is made of. He stood. And the worst part, the part that makes it perfect, is that he's right. We are going to go down there. Because Voldemort's down there or coming, I can feel it in the scar. It's been burning for weeks, and if we don't stop him, he gets the stone and gets his body back. So we have to spring the trap. He's built a situation where doing the right thing and walking into his experiment are the same act. Harry looked at his friends, which means we do it, but we do it his way only on the surface. Underneath, we do it ours. We tell Sirius. We tell Quince. We document everything before we go down so that whatever happens, the record shows the headmaster brought a cursed object into a school and engineered children into guarding it. If I die down there, I die with the 6th article proven in my own hand. And if I live, you're not going to die down there, Hermione said fiercely, because we're not going to be stupid about it, we're going to be us about it, and us about it means we go in prepared, and we go in having told 4 adults exactly where we are. They told 4 adults. That was the thing the story would never quite capture afterward, because it was not dramatic. There was no lone hero, no reckless midnight plunge. There was a letter to Sirius sent at sundown, and a letter to Quince, and a word to a portrait that creature had taught Harry could carry messages, and a note left for Professor McGonagall, who was not in the league of the conspiracy but who was honest and would act. And then, because the scar was burning and the stone could not wait for adults to arrive from Wales, 3 11-year-olds went down through the trapdoor and passed, one after another, through the obstacles that had been built for exactly 3 11-year-olds, until Harry stood alone in the last chamber before the mirror, facing the man he had known all year was wrong. It was Quirrell, of course, the stammering defense professor, the turban, and under the turban the thing that made Harry's scar feel like it was splitting, the face in the back of Quirrell's head, the wisp of a thing that had once been a man and was now barely even that. And Voldemort, what was left of him, looked out of the back of a stolen skull at the boy he had marked, and there was a long moment in which the whole war hung in a mirror. Harry did not win it by being the most powerful wizard in the room, because he was 11 and he was not. He won it the way Sirius had taught him to win everything, which was by having understood the situation better than his enemy. He knew, because Hermione had reasoned it out, that the stone could only be retrieved by someone who wanted to find it but not to use it, and that the mirror would not yield it to greed. He knew because Sirius had told him the night before through Creature's portrait that Quirrell could not bear his touch, that the protection his mother had worked in a nursery 11 years before still lived in his skin, that Lily Potter's love had been the first ward Sirius ever trusted and was the last one standing. And he knew, because 4 adults knew where he was, that he only had to survive, not to triumph, that the cavalry was already on the stairs. So he did not fight Voldemort. He kept the stone from him, refused, in front of the mirror, to want it for any reason the mirror would honor, thought instead of Sirius and a goose at Christmas and a will read aloud by a fire. And the mirror, finding no greed in him, gave the stone into his pocket and not into his hand to use. And when Quirrell seized him, Harry did the one thing his whole life had prepared him for, which was to hold on, the way he had held a collar in a ruined nursery. The way he had held Sirius in a staring street, and his mother's old magic flared in his skin, and Quirrell could not keep his grip, and the thing that had been Voldemort tore loose from its ruined host and fled, shrieking, through the stone, and Harry slid down the wall with his scar on fire and the stone in his pocket and waited, as he had been taught, for the adults he had told. They came, McGonagall first, then Dumbledore himself, sweeping into the chamber in a fury that was 3/4 genuine and 1/4, Harry would always believe, theater. And it was in the hospital wing 2 days later, when Harry was mended and the stone was destroyed and the school was buzzing, that the headmaster sat by his bed and made the case Sirius had warned him would come, the famous case, the case that had launched 100 quieter tragedies. "You were never in as much danger as you believed," Dumbledore said gently. "I was closer than you knew. I would not have let you come to true harm, Harry. I needed to know what you were. We all needed to know. The whole world has been waiting 11 years to know whether the boy who survived would, when the moment came, choose to protect what mattered or to seize what tempted, and you chose beautifully. You stood before the mirror of Arist, which shows the deepest desire of a man's heart, and your heart desired only to keep the stone from evil, not to use it. Do you know how rare that is? I am 110 years old, and I am not certain I could have done it. It was a test, yes, the greatest test, and you passed it, and now I know, and now the world can begin to—" "Stop," Harry said. He said it quietly, but he said it the way Sirius said no in a ruined nursery, the way that worked, and the old man stopped. "You brought a thing Voldemort wanted into a school," Harry said. "You announced where it was. You dared 11-year-olds not to look. You built a path through it that only children my age could just barely pass. And when one of those children nearly died proving your point, you came to his bedside and told him it was a gift because you needed to know what he was made of." He met the blue eyes, and he did not raise his voice, and that was what made it terrible. "Here's the thing I'm made of, since you needed to know. I'm made of a man who spent 11 years teaching me that when someone powerful tells you a dangerous thing was for your own good, you write down the date and the danger and the words for your own good, and you keep them. So I've written it all down. So has Hermione. So has my godfather, who has a Wisengamot seat now, and a solicitor who's already proven 4 of the 12 things my parents accused you of, and who told me, before I went down that trapdoor, that the 6th article was that you place people in danger you could prevent and call it the price of war." Harry let it sit. "You just told me to my face in front of Madame Pomfrey, who is a witness, that the danger was deliberate and the prevention was within your power and the purpose was a test. That's the 6th article, Professor. You proved it yourself. You always do. That's the thing my parents understood about you that took me 11 years to see. You can't help confessing, because in your own head it was never a crime, it was always a kindness, and a man who thinks his crimes are kindnesses says them out loud." Albus Dumbledore looked at Harry Potter for a long moment in the white quiet of the hospital wing, and something moved behind the blue eyes that was not anger and was not quite grief, but was, Harry thought, recognition, the look of a man who has spent his life surrounded by people who could not see the board, finally meeting a child who could. "He raised you to defeat me," Dumbledore said softly. "Sirius. He raised you deliberately from the cradle into the one weapon I have no counter for, a clever child who cannot be made lonely and cannot be made grateful. I did not think it could be done. I have spent a great deal of my life being the cleverest person in every room, Harry, and it has made me careless, because I assumed I always would be. He rose slowly, a tall figure folding upward, and looked down at the bed. Rest, you have earned it. And Harry, when you are older and you understand what is truly at stake, what I have been carrying alone all these years, I hope you will find it in you to forgive an old man for the methods of a hard war. There is a thing coming for which all of this has been preparation. I had hoped to choose the moment to tell you. I see now that you will choose it for me. That is probably better. That is probably how it should have always been. He left, and Harry lay in the white bed and turned that last part over, because it had the shape of a confession trying to disguise itself as a comfort, and the word preparation sat in it like a stone in a shoe. A thing coming, for which all of this has been preparation. He filed it the way he filed everything, and he resolved to find the true thing before Dumbledore could spend it, because that was the whole game, and he had 4 of 12 and a family and a window of years. And outside the hospital window the Welsh grey summer was coming, and somewhere across the country a goblin was keeping the numbers and a solicitor was sharpening the 5th article, and at home above a cove a man who had raised him to be exactly this was waiting with a will and a fire, and Merlin helped them all, a goose. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, Sworn Memory. The rat was caught in the 2nd week of Harry's 2nd year, and it was caught not by a curse or a chase, but by a goblin with a ledger, which was Sirius thought when the owl came, exactly how it should have been, given everything. Thornback's note was 4 lines. We have him. 11 years the Warrens have watched the drains, as I told you we would, and 3 years ago the trail went cold in the West Country, and we very nearly closed the file. It has reopened. A rat answering the description, grey, overfed, missing a toe, the toe being the relevant detail, since Peter Pettigrew left a finger behind to fake his death, and an animagus carries his wounds across the change, has wintered for some years in the household of a wizarding family named Weasley, and has this autumn travelled to Hogwarts in the trunk of their youngest son. He is in the castle, Mr. Black. He is, in point of fact, asleep on a 4th year's bed 3 corridors from your godson. Do nothing reckless. Tell the boy nothing he might do something reckless about. I have already informed Madame Bones, because a capture of this nature must be lawful from the first second or a clever advocate unmakes it, and she is arranging the warrant. Be at Gringotts, London on Saturday. Bring the solicitor. We are going to take Peter Pettigrew alive in front of witnesses under a ministry warrant, and then Mr. Black, we are going to pour truth serum down his throat in a chamber full of people who cannot afterward claim they were not there. Sirius read it standing in the kitchen at Moonkum with the autumn light coming off the cove, and he sat down slowly, because 11 years is a long time to want one thing, and the wanting had become so much a part of him that having it suddenly within reach felt like a floor giving way. Scabbers, he said aloud to the empty kitchen. He's been hiding in a child's pocket as a family pet called Scabbers. He started helplessly to laugh, and the laugh had something terrible in it. 11 years. He sold James and Lily to save his own skin, and then he spent 11 years sleeping in a little boy's bed being fed toast. I'm going to be calm about this. I've decided. I'm going to be the calmest man in Britain on Saturday, because a calm man gets his testimony admitted and a screaming one hands the defense a mistrial. He looked at the will, framed now on the kitchen wall where the lighthouse beam crossed it nightly. Article 9, Peter. You're Article 9 with legs, just like I told the goblin you'd be the night you ran. Come here, come and prove it. They took him on Saturday, and it was, by design, the least dramatic capture in the history of the war. Amelia Bones did it by the book, because the book was the weapon, a warrant properly sworn. 2 aurors, one of them a pink-haired probationer who had requested the duty in writing, and whose request had been granted because nepotism, Tonks said cheerfully, is only a crime when the family's no good. A summons served on the Weasley boy, who arrived at the headmaster's office white and bewildered with his rat in a cage, having been told only that the animal was wanted in a legal matter, and that he had done nothing wrong, which was true, and which Bones repeated to him 4 times because the child was shaking. And then in the headmaster's own office, under the gaze of the portraits and of Albus Dumbledore himself, who could not refuse to host the proceeding without looking as though he had something to hide, and who therefore sat in his own chair behind his own desk and watched, grandfatherly and grave, as the thing he had let lie buried for 11 years was dug up in front of him, Amelia Bones performed the forced revelation. The spell that compels an animagus to his human form is not gentle, and the grey rat came apart and reknit itself into a small, balding, trembling man on the headmaster's carpet, blinking in the light, his hands, one of them missing a finger, already up, already pleading, before he had finished becoming a person. Sirius, Peter Pettigrew said, in the wet, ingratiating voice that Sirius had once found funny, that he had once defended in common rooms, that he had once, God help him, trusted with the lives of the only family he had. Sirius, old friend, thank God it's you. You have to understand, he would have killed me. You don't know what it was like, you weren't there when he— Madam Bones, Sirius said, not loudly, his eyes never leaving Peter, his hands very still at his sides because he had decided they would be. Is everything lawful? The warrant, the revelation, the witnesses, is it clean? It's clean, Bones said, cleaner than anything in this country in 20 years. Mr. Pettigrew, you are detained on suspicion of the murder of 12 muggles, the framing of Sirius Black, and high treason in the matter of the deaths of James and Lily Potter. You'll be questioned under veritaserum, to which, as a suspect in a capital matter, you have no right of refusal under the Crouch provisions, the very provisions, Mr. Pettigrew, that the hero of the war passed to use on people like you, which is a justice so neat I intend to savor it. Or tonks the dosage. It was over in a sense in that moment, and in another sense it was the beginning of everything, because what came out of Peter Pettigrew under 3 drops of veritaserum, in the headmaster's office, transcribed by a ministry scribe and witnessed by 9 people including Albus Dumbledore, was not merely the confession that cleared Sirius and damned Peter. It was the 9th article and the 4th and the 10th falling out of a traitor's mouth one after another like coins from a slit purse. Who was the Potter's secret keeper? Bones asked. Me. Peter's voice was flat and dreamy under the serum, stripped of its wheedle. They switched to me a week before. Sirius's idea, decoy. No one would suspect me. They were right. No one did. And you carried the secret to Lord Voldemort. Yes, I'd been his for a year more. I was afraid. They were winning, our side, and I knew it wouldn't last. I knew he'd win in the end. Men like him always win, and I didn't want to be on the losing side when the bill came due. Did Albus Dumbledore know there was a traitor in the Potter's confidence? A silence. Every person in the room turned not to Pettigrew, but to the still figure behind the desk. He knew there was a leak, Pettigrew said dreamily. He told us at a meeting the summer before. He stood up and he said there was a spy close to the Potters. That information was reaching the Dark Lord that only the inner circle had, and he looked round the room at all of us, slow, one at a time, and I thought I was going to be sick. I thought he'd see it on me. But he didn't say a name. He didn't tell James and Lily to trust no one. He let them go on choosing among us as if any of us might be safe. I've wondered since, the dreamy voice did not change. I've wondered since whether he didn't name the spy because he didn't know which of us it was, or because a spy he could see was more useful to him than a spy he'd frightened into hiding. He used to say that, the price of war, he said it about a lot of things. The quill of the ministry scribe scratched and scratched. Amelia Bones did not look at Dumbledore. She had the discipline not to, and the discipline was its own kind of accusation. Did Dumbledore ever counsel the Potters against the goblins, against Gringotts, against lodging their affairs outside the ministry? Yes, Pettigrew's head lolled. I was there. James told me about it after, laughing, sort of, but not really. Dumbledore had heard they'd been to see a goblin about a will, and he came to the cottage, and he was so gentle about it, and he told them that to put their trust in goblin law instead of their own people was to make enemies of the wizards who'd shed blood beside them, that it would look like contempt, that it would isolate Harry from the only world that could protect him. James said it was the only time Dumbledore ever raised his voice in his house, over the will, over the goblins. He didn't want it in a place he couldn't reach. Pettigrew's ruined hand twitched on the carpet. He was right to be afraid of it, wasn't he? Look where we are, the goblins kept the thing he couldn't burn, and now I'm lying on his floor telling you all of it. That, said Bartholomew Quince very quietly from his place by the wall, and it was the first thing the solicitor had said, is the 10th article, confessed by a witness under serum in the presence of the accused. He counseled them against trusting goblin law because he did not wish to be reached, and the man who has just told us so is the proof of how right they were not to listen. He made a small note, the 9th and the 10th in one afternoon, Mr. Black, and the 4th waits only for one more voice. The hardest part of it for Harry was Ron. Because it was Ron's rat. It had been Ron's brother Percy's rat before that, and the Weasley family's before that, for 11 years. 11 years in which a fugitive murderer had slept in a child's bed and eaten from a child's hand and been, to a poor family with too many sons and not enough to go round, a small free pet that one boy after another had loved. And now it was a balding man in a ministry cell, and the cleverest people in Britain were calling it the breaking of the great case, and Ron Weasley sat in the Gryffindor common room with his hands between his knees and could not look at anyone. He let Bill carry him to Egypt, Ron said, when Harry finally sat down beside him and said nothing, which was the thing Sirius had taught him to do, to bring his presence and not his opinions. Scabbers, we took him to Egypt last summer on the holiday. Dad won the prize draw and we all went, and the rat came and he sat on my shoulder by the pyramids. I thought he was just an old rat. I used to talk to him. Ron's ears had gone red. I told him things. When Fred and George were when I was the youngest and the most useless and there were 6 of us and one of me, I used to tell the rat. And it was him. It was the man who killed your mum and dad, listening to a stupid little kid go on about his brothers for 11 years. You weren't useless, Harry said. You're the reason we got through the chess room last year. You nearly got yourself killed, so Hermione, and I could go on. You're the best strategic mind in our year and everyone but you knows it. And you didn't shelter a murderer, Ron. Your family was robbed. He stole 11 years of being your pet, the same way he stole my parents. You're not on his side of this, you're on mine. You're one of the people he stole from. Harry looked at his friend, the freckled, miserable face, and said the true thing, because Sirius had taught him that the true thing said plainly is worth more than any comfort. I'm not angry at you. I could never be angry at you for this. The only thing I feel about you and that rat is that I'm sorry he was in your house, sorry he heard the things a little kid told him, sorry you have to carry knowing it. That's not guilt, Ron, that's another wound he made. You're allowed to be hurt by it without being to blame for it. Sirius taught me the difference. It took him about 9 years to learn it himself, so don't feel slow. Ron scrubbed his face with the heel of his hand and was quiet for a while. Your godfather, he said at last, thickly. He's mad, you know that, sending howlers that say he loves you, coming to school to sign forms just to annoy Dumbledore. Mad. Completely, Harry agreed. My mum cried when she heard, Ron said, not about the rat. About, she said, that poor boy lost everything and somebody loved him anyway. Somebody fought the whole world to love him, and she put you in the Christmas jumpers and she's never even met you. He managed, finally, a watery grin. So you're stuck with us now. Weasleys don't unadopt, it's a rule. You'll be getting jumpers till you die. Good, Harry said, and meant it, and the thing between them mended, because it was built of better stuff than a traitor had ever understood. The fourth, the article about Remus, the debt of secrets, the setting of friend to watch friend, was proven not in the headmaster's office but 2 weeks later, before a closed panel of the Wisengamot's Law Committee, and it was proven by Remus Lupin himself, who walked into that chamber as a werewolf, which is to say as a person the law of Britain barely counted as a person, and who put his hand on the recording stone and gave the testimony he had been carrying for 12 years. In the spring of 1981, Remus said, and his voice did not shake, because Sirius had sat up with him the night before until it stopped shaking, Albus Dumbledore came to me privately and told me that my position was useful to the Order. That as a werewolf I could move among the packs and among the families in ways others could not. He told me he needed me to watch, to report on the movements and the loyalties of those closest to James Potter, including Sirius Black. Including Peter Pettigrew. He told me that if I loved James I would do this and ask no questions, and he reminded me, gently without ever quite saying it, that my license to live and work in the wizarding world rested on references that he provided, that a word from him could end my livelihood. He did not threaten me, he never threatened anyone, he simply made the shape of the threat visible and let me fill it in myself. Remus looked once at the recording stone and then out at the panel. I did as he asked. I watched, my friends, and because I was watching Sirius I half believed it might be serious, and because James knew I was a werewolf with a monster in me, James half believed it might be me, and the two of us who would have died for each other stopped speaking honestly exactly when speaking honestly might have saved their lives. That is what the fourth article means. It does not mean Dumbledore killed anyone. It means he took the trust between people who loved each other and used it as a tool, and a tool, when you are done with it, is set down, and what he set down was 3 friends who could no longer look one another in the eye. The traitor was Peter. But the silence that hid the traitor, the silence in which Peter could work, Dumbledore built that deliberately out of all of us and called it security. There was a silence in the committee room when he finished. Madame Marchbanks in the chair, an old woman with a spine like a wand, looked down the length of the table at the empty seat where the chief warlock would ordinarily have sat. He had recused himself from this particular session, which was its own admission, and she said in a dry voice that carried, "Let the record show that the fourth article is sustained. And let the record further show that I have sat on this body for 60 years, and I have never in 60 years heard a witness the crown counts as half a person deliver a fuller account of his own betrayal than this body has just heard from Mr. Lupin, and that I will personally curse the next member who refers to him as a creature within my hearing. We are adjourned." The black seat came back to the family the same week, and that was no accident either, because Quince had timed the petition to land while the chamber still smelled of Remus Lupin's testimony, while the old slighted elders were freshly reminded that the chief warlock's office had a habit of losing the paperwork of anyone it found inconvenient. The committee that had refused to sit for 11 years sat at last in an afternoon under the eye of Madame Marchbanks, and it found, there being no longer any advantage to anyone in pretending otherwise, that the suspension of the black seat had never had a lawful basis, that family disgrace was not a category known to the statute, and that Lord Sirius Orion Black was entitled to take up the seat his house had held since the Wizengamot was founded. So Sirius Black, who 12 years before had sat in a broken chair in a roofless nursery with a baby on his chest and asked a goblin whether he could win, walked into the Wizengamot chamber in the deep red robes of a voting lord and took the black seat, and beside it, by proxy, the Potter seat his godson had handed him, so that he sat with 2 votes where the year before he had sat with none. He was not a natural for the place. He fidgeted. He said the wrong thing twice and the devastatingly right thing once. But he sat, and the simple fact of his sitting, a black raised to be the family's shame, occupying its ancient seat by clean law beside the seat of the boy he had saved, was a thing the whole chamber had to look at, and looking at it, the chamber understood that the story everyone had been told for 11 years. The story in which Sirius Black was a reckless embarrassment and Albus Dumbledore was the steady hand, had quietly become a different story, and that the different story was winning. 2 votes, Marchbanks observed to him afterward, in the corridor, with the dryness of a woman who had examined his catastrophic transfiguration, NEWT 40 years before, and never forgotten it. Do try not to use them the way you used your wand at 16, Lord Black, though I'll confess, and the old eyes glittered, the chamber has been a great deal too quiet for 40 years, and you are a great many things, but quiet has never once been among them. Welcome. There are about 9 of us who have waited a long time for someone with the standing to say aloud what we have only been able to mutter. Sit near me, we mutter together. That made 8. 8 of the 12 in the law on the record, sworn and sustained, and the country had begun to feel the weight of it the way you feel a tide coming in long before it reaches you, not all at once, but as a slow change in everything, a wetness in the sand. The Daily Prophet, which had spent 11 years treating the black-raised Potter boy as a curiosity, began to treat him as a cause. There were letters, there were questions in odd corners of the ministry. There were old men in the Wizengamot, the ones Dumbledore had reorganized and slighted and outmaneuvered over 50 years, who began to remember that they had reasons of their own, and to find, in the 7 proven articles, a flag they could march under that was not quite mutiny. Peter Pettigrew was tried in the open before the full Wizengamot because Amelia Bones insisted on it, because the whole point, her point in Quince's and the dead Potters, was that a thing done in the light cannot be undone in the dark. The country watched. The prophet printed the transcript over 4 days. And the part the country could not stop talking about was not the murder of the Potters, terrible as it was, but the small procedural fact that Quince made certain was read into the record on the first morning. That on the night Peter Pettigrew fled, the Ministry of Magic had issued an order to imprison Sirius Black in Aszkaban for those same murders, without charge and without trial, on no evidence whatever, and that the only reason an innocent man had not spent 12 years among the Dementors for a crime committed by the man now in the dock was that a goblin had reached a ruined cottage 40 minutes before anyone in authority thought to look. "Consider the 2 men before you," Quince said to the chamber on the final day, and he did not raise his voice because the facts did not require it. Peter Pettigrew guilty, who walked free for 12 years because no one questioned the convenient story. Sirius Black innocent, who was very nearly destroyed for 12 years by that same story, signed and sealed before a single question was asked. They were processed by the same machine, members of the Wizengamot. The machine got both of them exactly wrong, and it got them wrong on the same night with the same haste under the same signatures. I ask you to convict Peter Pettigrew. But I ask you to remember, when you have, that the system which is about to do justice to him today is the same system that was 40 minutes from doing the gravest injustice in living memory to the man sitting in the Lord's benches in red robes, and that the difference between those 2 outcomes was not the law. It was a goblin and a will. You might ask yourselves how often the difference has been nothing at all. They convicted Pettigrew. They sent him to Aszkaban with a trial which was, Sirius reflected from the red benches, the one mercy the man had never extended to anyone, and the one the law extended to him without blinking, and that was the difference between Peter's side and his, in the end the whole difference, the only one that had ever mattered. And when the verdict was read, the eyes of the chamber went, as one, to Sirius Black in his lord's robes, the man the same chamber would have fed to the Dementors 12 years before, and the silence that followed was not comfortable, and was not meant to be. Dumbledore asked to see him after the 8th article was sustained, and Sirius went, because you do not learn your enemy's mind by avoiding him, and because some reckless part of Sirius had wanted, for 12 years, to sit across a desk from the man as an equal and not a supplicant. The office was full of whirring silver instruments and the smell of lemon, and Fawkes regarded Sirius from his perch with a bird's indifferent gold eye, and Dumbledore poured tea that Sirius did not drink and folded his hands and looked, for the first time in 12 years, genuinely tired. "You have proven 8 of the 12, Dumbledore said. "I did not believe it could be done. Not because the articles were false, I will not insult you by pretending they were all false, but because the proving of them required a patience and a precision I did not think your nature could sustain. I was wrong about your nature. I have been wrong about a great many things, Sirius, and I find at my age that being wrong has begun to interest me more than being right, which is either wisdom or the beginning of the end, and I genuinely cannot tell which." He looked at Sirius over the half-moon spectacles. "I am going to ask you to stop, not for my sake. My reputation is a ruin, and I have made my peace with ruins. I am going to ask you to stop because there is a thing coming that the whole of our world will need to be united to survive, and you are, with the best intentions and the cleanest hands, dismantling the one structure that has kept it standing. When Voldemort returns, and he will, you have seen the signs, your cousin Malfoy has surely told you, he is not subtle, this country will need a Wisengamot that functions, a ministry that is not at war with itself, and a people who have not spent 3 years learning that their institutions are corrupt. I have spent my life building those things imperfectly, sometimes cruelly. You are taking them apart faster than I can defend them, and you are right to, and it may kill us all." "Then tell me the thing that's coming," Sirius said. "All of it, the prophecy, the scar, what you've been preparing Harry for, the 11th article. Tell me here now, and I'll judge for myself whether your structure's worth keeping, instead of taking your word that the cellar's load-bearing while you keep the door locked." He leaned forward. "That's the whole trouble with you, Albus. You want me to stop pulling out the stones because the house is load-bearing, but you won't let anyone but you see the foundation. Show me the foundation. Show me what Harry is to you. And if it's what I'm afraid it is, if the 11th article is true, if you've been raising the boy I love towards some moment where you mean to spend him, then no, I will not stop. I will not stop if it brings the whole rotten ceiling down on both of us. Because there is no structure on this earth worth the price of that child, and the fact that you can sit there and weigh it, that you can put my godson on one pan of the scale and the whole world on the other and look thoughtful, is the entire reason his parents wrote your name 12 times in a will." Dumbledore was silent for a long moment. The silver instrument's word. Fawkes shifted on his perch. "When the time is right," the old man said at last, very gently, "I will tell him myself, everything. I promise you that, Sirius. There are things a boy should not carry before he is ready, and things I am not yet permitted to say in a moment that has not yet come." "That's not an answer." "No," Dumbledore agreed, and the steel came up through the kindness, naked for once, unhidden. "It is not. It is the only thing I have to offer, and you will not take it, and so we will go on as we are, you pulling out the stones and I defending them, until the thing arrives that resolves it for both of us. I had hoped to spare you that. I see that I cannot. Give my regards to Harry. He is a remarkable young man, and I mean that without a particle of strategy, which is rare enough for me that you might note the date." He rose. "You may show yourself out. And Sirius, when it comes, and it will, remember that I asked you to stop, and that you said no, and that I did not blame you for it. Hold on to that. You may need it. There was, that year, a diary. It came into the school the way poison comes into a well, quietly and from above, and Harry would not understand until much later that Lucius Malfoy had slipped it into the cauldron of a frightened first-year named Ginny Weasley, Ron's small sister, new to the castle, lonely in a way Harry recognized and grieved, in the bustle of the bookshop before term. It was a plain black book, a 50-year-old diary, and it wrote back when you wrote in it, in a careful, charming, helpful hand, and it signed itself T.M. Riddle, and it had begun, by midwinter, to do worse things than write. Hermione found the pattern because Hermione found every pattern, petrified students. A message daubed on a wall about a chamber and an air, a monster no one could see, and a first year going gray and hollow and forgetful, losing hours, frightened of her own hand. Harry got the diary away from Ginny Weasley on a wild February night in a bathroom that should have been the end of 3 children and was not, because once again they had done it the way Sirius taught, told 4 adults, gone in prepared, fought to survive and not to win, and the thing inside the diary, the memory of a boy named Tom Riddle who had grown up to be Lord Voldemort, very nearly drank a small girl's life to make itself flesh before Harry drove a basilisk fang through the book, and the ink ran out of it like black blood, and a voice screamed in a register that had nothing human left in it. It was the screaming that told them. Hermione stood over the ruined diary in the flooded chamber, white to the lips, and said the thing that changed the shape of the war. "That wasn't a memory, Harry. A memory doesn't scream when you stab it. A memory doesn't bleed. There was something of him in that book, a piece of him, an actual piece, kept alive in an object for 50 years, waiting. She looked at the fang in his hand, at the ink soaking away into the water. He put part of himself in a book so that even if his body died, the piece would survive. That's why he didn't die when he hit you as a baby. That's why your scar hurts. There's more than one of these, there has to be. Why would you only make one? And Harry, we just destroyed one. We proved it can be destroyed. A 12-year-old with a fang in a flooded room destroyed a piece of Lord Voldemort's soul, and the world still turned. Her voice dropped. I don't know what that means yet. But I know it's the most important thing we've found, and I know we have to tell Sirius tonight, and I know it connects to that locket your house elf keeps muttering about, the one your godfather's brother died for. Doesn't it? It's the same kind of thing. It has to be. Harry stood in the cold water with the dead book at his feet and the scar quiet on his forehead for the first time in months, and he thought about the 11th article, the one his parents could not prove, the one about his death being necessary when the time comes, and he thought about a thing that survives in an object and a scar that hurts and a headmaster who spoke of preparation, and he did not yet have the whole shape of it, but he had the edges, and the edges were enough to be afraid of. We tell Sirius tonight, he agreed. All of it, the book, the screaming, the piece, and Hermione, he looked at the fang. We just learned how to kill him, properly, permanently, without anyone having to die for it except the pieces themselves. Whatever Dumbledore's been preparing me for, whatever the 11th article really means, we just found a way around it that he doesn't know we have. He picked up the ruined diary, careful, evidence now and not merely horror. Find the true thing before he can spend it. We just found a true thing the size of the whole war. Come on. Sirius needs to see this before anyone tells the headmaster a single word. And there was, on the other side, the gathering. Sirius felt it before he could name it, the way you feel whether in an old wound. The Death Eaters who had walked free, who had pleaded the imperious curse, or bought their way out, or simply been too rich and too well connected to convict, had spent 11 years quiet, and the quiet had been, Sirius now understood, a kind of waiting. They had waited because Dumbledore had been the wall between them and a country that wanted them in Aszkaban, and a wall, however much you hate it, is a thing you do not knock down while it is keeping out something worse. But the wall was cracking. Every article proven against Dumbledore was a stone out of the wall, and the men on the other side of it had begun, very quietly, to test the gaps. Lucius Malfoy came to see Sirius in November, uninvited in the public room of the Leaky Cauldron, because the Leaky was public and a public meeting cannot later be called a conspiracy. He was as pale and as elegant as the family had always been, and he sat down across from Sirius with the ease of a man who has never once in his life been told he could not sit somewhere, and he turned his serpent-headed cane between his fingers and smiled. Cousin, he said, because they were, distantly, everyone in that world was, you've had a remarkable few years, 8 of 12, I'm told. The old man's coming apart in slow motion, and you're the one holding the knife, and I find I'm here to do something I never expected, which is to congratulate a blood traitor. The smile did not reach the gray eyes. We were never friends, you and I, but we are, it seems, presently useful to one another, and usefulness outlasts friendship every time. You're dismantling Albus Dumbledore, so in our patient way are we. It seems foolish for us to be in each other's path when we are walking, for once, in the same direction. We're not walking in the same direction, Sirius said. You want him gone so there's no one left to stop you. I want him gone so there's no one left to use Harry. Those look like the same direction for exactly as long as it takes to get him out of the way, and then you turn on the boy and I turn on you, and we both know it, so let's not pretend this is a negotiation. What do you actually want, Lucius? Malfoy's smile thinned, and something underneath it showed, and the something was hunger. I want you to understand, he said softly, that when the wall comes down, and you are the one bringing it down, cousin, you, with your goblins and your solicitor and your clever little ward, the thing on the other side of the wall is not gratitude. The old man has been protecting more than he lets on. He has been protecting all of us, even those of us who hate him, from a thing he knows is coming back. You think you are fighting Albus Dumbledore. You are, but every brick you pull out of him, you pull out of the only structure standing between your godson and the master I have not stopped serving in my heart for one single day. He rose and set a galleon on the table for a drink he had not ordered, an old aristocrat's insult. He's coming back, Sirius, our lord. The signs are everywhere if you know the old signs, and I know them. And when he comes, he will want the boy, and the only man clever enough to have hidden the boy properly will be a discredited ruin you spent a decade destroying. Do think about that. You may find that the wool your friends left you is a key that unlocks a great many doors, and that some doors are better left shut. He inclined his head, every inch the gentleman. "Give my regards to the heir of the House of Black, such a promising young man. It would be a tragedy if the world were not safe enough for him to enjoy his inheritance." He left, and Sirius sat in the public room with the cold galleon on the table, and for the first time in a long time the falling that never landed felt less like love and more like the floor of the world tilting. Because Lucius Malfoy was a liar and a snake and had not, Sirius was nearly certain, told a single lie in that entire conversation. He went home, and he did the thing he always did when he was afraid, which was to find the people who would tell him the truth. Quince said the Malfoy approach was a tactic, an attempt to frighten Sirius into slowing the campaign, and that they should not slow the campaign. Remus said that Malfoy's certainty about Voldemort's return was the only part worth taking seriously, and that they should prepare for it without letting it govern them. And Creature, who had been listening from the doorway as he always listened, who knew where every black secret was buried, Creature came forward into the firelight with his great pale eyes fixed on Sirius, and said the thing that none of them had been ready for. "The young master's friend," Creature said, "the Malfoy. He spoke of the Dark Lord coming back. Creature knows how a wizard comes back. Master Regulus learned it, and it killed him, and he made Creature swear." The elf's voice dropped. "There is a locket. Creature has shown the heir the locket, but the locket is one of many. The Dark Lord tore his soul into pieces and hid the pieces, and while the pieces exist he cannot truly die. He can only wait and gather and come back. Master Regulus died destroying one piece. There are others." And Creature has wondered these 11 years, listening to the wizard's talk of the boy's scar that hurts, of the night the Dark Lord broke himself on a baby and did not die. Creature stopped and looked at Sirius, and there was something in the old elf's face that was almost pity. Creature has wondered whether the cleverest wizard in Britain has wondered the same thing, and whether that is why the 11th article says what it says, whether that is the thing the old man means to spend the boy on, whether the boy is a piece. The fire cracked. Outside, the tide was coming in. "No," Sirius said. It came out of him before thought, the way No had come out of him in a ruined nursery 12 years before. "Number, we are not." Creature, look at me. "We are not going to assume the worst thing in the world is true because a snake frightened me in a pub and an old elf is brave enough to say the unsayable. We're going to do what we always do. We're going to find out." He stood, and the recklessness that Dumbledore had warned of 12 years before, the recklessness that had never once gone away, came up in him now and turned, as it always turned when it mattered, into something cold and exact. "We're going to find out exactly what the 11th article means, and exactly what's in my godson's scar, and exactly what Albus Dumbledore has been preparing him for, before Dumbledore can spend it, before Voldemort can use it. That's the whole game. It always has been. Find the true thing first." He looked round the firelit kitchen at the strange family the will had built, the werewolf, the solicitor, the house elf, the framed accusation on the wall, and he made the decision that would carry them into the worst year of all. "Quince, don't slow the campaign, speed it up. I want the remaining articles proven before the year's out, all of them but the 11th, because the 11th we're not going to prove in a courtroom. The 11th we're going to disprove in the world. We're going to make it so that whatever Dumbledore was preparing Harry to die for, the dying isn't necessary because we got there first." The lighthouse beam came round and crossed the will, and the gold lines of the 8 proven articles glowed for a moment and went dark. "He raised the boy to defeat me," Dumbledore said. "He was wrong about that too. I didn't raise Harry to defeat anyone. I raised him to live, and I am going to spend whatever's left of me making sure he gets to." Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, The Chief Warlock's Docket. By the spring of Harry's 4th year there were 9 articles proven, and the 9th had been the strangest of all, because it had been proven not by a goblin or a witness, but by a calendar. The 5th article, the order oaths, the binding of members to Dumbledore personally rather than to the cause, the silencing clause that prevented any of them from speaking against him to the law, had been the one Quince called impossible, because the oath was secret and self-concealing, and a man under it could not even describe it without the words turning to ash in his mouth, which was rather the point. They had circled it for a year. And then Hermione, who was 15 now and had grown only more dangerous, had solved it the way she solved everything, by refusing to attack the thing directly and attacking instead the shape of the hole it left. "You can't make the oath-takers testify," she had written to Sirius in a letter Quince later had framed, because the oath forbids speech against him, but the oath only forbids speech against him. It can't forbid speech about itself in the abstract, because the oath-makers never imagined anyone would think to ask the abstract question. So don't ask Daedalus Diggle whether Dumbledore did anything wrong, the oath gags that. Ask him to attempt the sentence, "I am free to report wrongdoing by the Chief Warlock to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement." Ask 12 former Order members to attempt that exact sentence under recording in front of the Wisengamot. If the sentence is true for them, they'll say it. If they've been bound by an oath that makes it false, the words will not come. They will choke, every one of them in the same place on the same clause, and 12 people choking in unison on the same sentence is not testimony about the oath. It is the oath demonstrated in the body where it cannot lie. They had done it in March. 12 former members of the Order of the Phoenix, summoned as witnesses, asked each in turn to speak a single plain sentence about their own freedom to report wrongdoing. And one after another, they had opened their mouths and found the words gone, had gripped the rail and gone gray and been unable, physically unable, to say that they were free, and the 12th had wept with the effort of a sentence that would not come. And the chamber had watched 12 loyal people be silenced by a thing none of them could even name, and that had been the 5th article, proven in the throats of the faithful, more damning than any document. So it was 9, and the campaign had become, by the 4th year, a thing larger than Sirius Black, a movement with old Wisengamot elders at its head and a public behind it and a momentum that no longer required him to push it. Which was why when the great motion came at last, the motion that went after the 12th article and the whole architecture of Dumbledore's power, it was not Sirius who rose to make it. It was Tiberius Ogden. Ogden was older than Marchbanks, older than the building practically, a man who had served on the Wisengamot for 70 years and who had 11 years before resigned from it in protest at something he had never been willing to explain, and who had returned this year for one purpose, which he announced from the floor in a voice like a dry riverbed. I resigned this body in protest, Ogden said, and I never said why, and I will say why now, because the why has finally become useful. I resigned because I came to understand that I was not a member of a court. I was a piece of furniture in one man's office. The dockets were set by the chief warlock. Committees were appointed by the chief warlock. The cases that were heard and the cases that were quietly lost and the order in which we voted and the very questions we were permitted to consider, all of it ran through one office, held by one man who was also the head of our international body and also the master of the school where every one of our children is formed. I resigned because I realized I had spent 40 years believing I was helping to govern when I was only helping to ratify. He turned slowly to face the high seat where Albus Dumbledore sat in midnight blue. The 12th article does not accuse you of a crime, Albus. That is what makes it the most serious of all. It accuses you of an arrangement. It says that no person should be permitted to be at once the body that judges, the body that oversees, and the place where the next generation is shaped, and that you have been all three for half a century, and that the rest of us let you because you were wise and because you were kind and because the arrangement was comfortable, and because every time anyone reached for the thing you held, you were so very gentle and so very reasonable and so very certain that the timing was wrong. I move that the offices be separated. I move that no holder of the chief warlock's chair may simultaneously hold the headship of Hogwarts or the office of supreme mugwump. I move in short that we become a court at last, 70 years too late, while 1 or 2 of us are still alive to see it. The motion carried. It did not carry easily, and it did not carry kindly, and there were speeches in defense of Dumbledore that were sincere and even moving, because the man had given 50 years and saved the country once and was beloved, truly beloved, by half the people voting. But it carried because Ogden had not framed it as a punishment. He had framed it as a repair. And you cannot defend an arrangement by arguing it should belong to one good man forever, when the whole accusation is that no arrangement should belong to one man at all. Albus Dumbledore rose when it was done to surrender the chief warlock's chair he had held for 38 years. He did it with grace. He did it with a short speech that Sirius would remember for the rest of his life, because it was the most honest thing the man had ever said in public, and because it was also, unmistakably, a warning. You are right, Dumbledore told the chamber. That is the difficulty with me, and it always has been. I am so very often right that you stop checking, and a man no one checks becomes, in time, a danger no matter how good his heart. And I will not stand here and tell you my heart was always good, because it was not, and some of the proofs of that are on your record now in my own hand, and I do not contest them. Separate the offices. You should have done it 40 years ago. I will surrender this chair to whomever you elect, and I will return to my school, and I will be only a headmaster, which is the only one of the 3 I ever truly loved. He paused, and the blue eyes swept the chamber, and the kindness in them did not hide the steel beneath, did not even try to. I ask only this. When the reckoning you have all been so patient about arrives, and it is closer than you think, it is nearly upon us. I have felt it gathering for a year, as some of you have felt your knees ache before rain. When it arrives, do not look round this chamber for the man who held 3 offices and spent 50 years keeping the dark at bay. because you have just very wisely and very rightly dismantled him. I do not say this to frighten you. I say it because it is true, and because I would rather be the man who warned you and was hated for it than the man who let you walk comfortably into the storm. Elect a worthy successor. Choose quickly. You have less time than you imagine. He stepped down from the high seat for the last time. I have always had less time than I imagined. It is the great theme of my life. Good afternoon. The separation of the offices had one consequence that even Quince had not fully foreseen, and it was the consequence that proved the third article. For when a man surrenders an office, the office is audited, handed over, inventoried, its files transferred to the body it now answers to, and the office of Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, which Dumbledore had held alongside the others for decades, had files that no one in Britain had ever been permitted to see, because they were international and beyond the Wisengamot's ordinary reach. And shielded by the polite fiction that what passed between nations was no business of a single nation's court, the audit reached them in May. And in the emigration and asylum records of the Confederation, in a folder marked with the Potter name, Quince's clerks found the third article entire. They applied to leave, Quince told the family, around the kitchen table at Moonkum, with the folder open before him and his moon-sized spectacles very still, in the autumn of 1980. James and Lily Potter applied to the Confederation for sanctuary relocation, a standard wartime provision, by which a magical family under direct threat may be resettled in a neutral country under the Confederation's protection, with new wards, new identities, beyond the reach of a national conflict. Dozens of families used it during the war. It exists precisely for people in exactly the Potters' situation. They applied. The application was sound. It would have taken Harry out of Britain before he was a year old, to a country Voldemort had no purchase in, under names no Death Eater knew. He turned the page. It was refused. And here is the refusal, and here is the hand that wrote the recommendation the Confederation refused them on, and it is the hand of the Supreme Mugwump, who wrote, I will read it exactly, I cannot in conscience recommend the relocation of this family. Their presence in Britain is of singular importance to the resolution of the present conflict, and their removal would deprive the resistance of a symbol it cannot spare. I would counsel them, as I have counseled them in person, that their duty lies in remaining. Signed, A. Dumbledore, Supreme Mugwump. The solicitor set down the page. They tried to take their son and run, Mr. Black. The provision existed. The door was open. And the man who held the keys to the international door, the same man who held the keys to the will and the seat in the vault, wrote in his own hand that their duty was to stay and be a symbol, and they stayed, and they were a symbol, and a year later they were a symbol on a gravestone. That is the third article, proven in the records of the Confederation in his own hand on the same page that could have saved their lives. 11 of the 12, Mr. Black, there is one left. No one at the table spoke for a while. Harry reached out eventually and turned the folder so he could read the line himself. Their duty lies in remaining, in the careful, kindly, terrible hand he had known since he was a baby, the hand that had lent him a book in a corridor and signed a howler's worth of small mercies, and he read it twice, and then he closed the folder very gently, the way Sirius closed things instead of doing the other thing. He didn't kill them, Harry said. I keep needing to say it because I keep needing it to be simpler than it is. He didn't cast the curse. He just stood at every door they might have walked out of, being kind, being certain, being right, and closed each one in a voice you couldn't argue with, until the only door left was the one with Voldemort behind it. He looked up. 11 of 12, and the 12th's the one about my death, so I suppose we'd better go and look in his basin, hadn't we, and find out what the last door is. He was right about the time. That was the horror of him, the horror that never resolved. He was so often right. They had been hunting the soul pieces for 2 years by then, quietly, the way they did everything, and they had found the shape of the hunt, if not yet the end of it. Creature's locket had come first, Regulus Black's locket, the one he had died exchanging, recovered at last from the cave that killed him and destroyed in the Gringotts vault by a goblin-forged blade and a basilisk fang Harry had kept from the chamber, so that a second screaming piece of Lord Voldemort had run out of the world like ink. The diary destroyed, the locket destroyed. 2 of an unknown number, and Hermione had built a theory of the rest from a stolen hour in the restricted section and a great deal of reasoning. That Voldemort would have chosen objects of meaning, relics, trophies, a number with power in it, and that somewhere in the pattern was the answer to the question none of them said aloud at the table, but all of them carried, the question of the scar that hurt, the question of the 11th article. We don't say it, Sirius had ruled early, until we know. We don't put the worst thing into the boy's head as a maybe. When we know, we'll know together, and we'll face it together, and not before. And so they had hunted and proven articles and lived. There had been birthdays. There had been a summer Harry learned to surf the cove on a charmed board with Tonks wiping out spectacularly beside him. There had been Sunday dinners and Christmas geese, and the ordinary loud warmth of a family that refused, on principle, to let the war it was fighting take the joy out of the house it was fighting from. That was the thing Dumbledore had never managed in any of his lonely soldiers, and it was the thing that would, in the end, decide everything. That the people hunting the darkest magic in Britain did it from a kitchen that smelled of goose, and went home to each other every single night, and were happy, and a happy hunter is harder to break than a brave one, because there is nothing hollow in him for the dark to fill. The fourth year was the trap year, and they knew it was a trap year by Halloween, because Hermione knew. The Triwizard Tournament had come to Hogwarts, a great spectacle, 3 schools, an ancient cup, a thing not held in a century, and Harry Potter, who was 14 and a year too young to enter, had found his name come out of the goblet of fire all the same, a 4th champion where there should have been 3, bound by a contract of magic he had never signed. The school had taken it for glory-seeking. Sirius had taken it for what it was within the hour, because Sirius had spent 14 years asking who a thing was shaped for. And Hermione had taken it apart entirely by the first week of November, in a letter to Moonkum that ran to 9 feet. A 4th year cannot put his name past an age line cast by Dumbledore, she had written. So someone older did it for him, someone who wanted Harry bound into a year-long event no one could remove him from because a Triwizard champion cannot withdraw. The contract is magical and absolute, which means whoever entered Harry didn't want him to win a tournament. They wanted him locked into a place and a schedule for 9 months, unable to leave, his movements known in advance. Delivered to a series of dangerous tasks by the rules themselves. It's not a competition, Harry. It's a cage with a calendar. And the only new adult in the castle this year is the new defense professor, and I have watched him for 6 weeks, and he drinks from a private flask every hour exactly, on the hour, the way a man does who is holding a disguise together, and I think he is not who he says he is, and I think the tournament is the delivery mechanism, and I think the final task is the appointment, and I think we have until June. They had until June. So they spent it the way the family spent everything, preparing. Harry trained because the tasks were real and would kill him if he was not ready, and he passed through a dragon and a lake, and the slow tightening of the year with Ron beside him and Hermione 3 steps ahead of every danger. But underneath the visible preparation ran the real one. Creature keyed a black family portkey to Harry's blood and sewed it into the lining of every robe the boy owned, a thing of goblin silver older than the school's wards and invisible to them, so that wherever the cage's calendar finally delivered him, he would carry his own door home. Sirius positioned allies. Remus took leave from everything and came north under a glamour. And they told the truth to exactly the people who needed it and no one else, and they did not tell Dumbledore because Dumbledore, separated from his offices and watching his life's work be audited, was a man with his hands full in his own agenda, and the family had learned across 14 years that the safest secrets were the ones the great man did not get to manage. "You think it's Voldemort," Harry had said to his godfather at Christmas in the lighthouse light, at the end of it. "You think the whole tournament's a machine for getting me somewhere he can finish what he started. I think it's the bill coming due," Sirius had said. "I think we pulled out enough of Dumbledore's wall that the thing behind it found a gap, and I think it spent a year reaching through. So we do what we always do. We don't stop the bill. I don't think we can stop it now. We make sure that when it arrives, you're the one holding the door." He put his hand on the back of Harry's neck, the old gesture, "Carry the portkey. Whatever happens in June, however it goes wrong, and it'll go wrong, traps always spring. That's what therefore you close your hand on the silver and you come home. Not stand and fight, not be a hero. Come home. Heroes are what he makes out of lonely boys, Harry. You're not lonely, you come home." Voldemort came back 3 weeks later. He came back in the old way, the way Creature had described, and the way the darkest books confirmed, through a ritual of bone and blood and flesh, in a country churchyard, served by a man no one had suspected because the man had spent a year wearing another man's face inside Hogwarts itself. A Death Eater who had escaped Aszkaban by a trick and a mother's love, and had spent the 4th year teaching defense against the dark arts under a stolen identity, 3 doors from Harry. Feeding him exactly the lessons that would keep him alive long enough to be useful at the appointed hour. He returned Harry to a graveyard at Wand Point at the end of the Triwizard Tournament that the false professor had spent a year steering Harry into, and there, among the headstones, Lord Voldemort rose again into a body, white and serpentine and whole, and looked for the first time in 14 years upon the boy he had failed to kill. And the boy did not die. He did not die because, once again and for the last time, he had done it the way Sirius taught. He had known the tournament was a trap. Hermione had known by October, had mapped the impossibility of a fourth year's name leaving that goblet by accident, had said the word steered in a letter that Sirius still carried. He had not been able to escape the trap because the trap was the whole year and the year could not be skipped, but he had told 4 adults. He had gone in prepared. And when the false professor's plan delivered him to the graveyard, Harry Potter went with a thing in his pocket that Albus Dumbledore had not given him, and did not know he had, a black family portkey, keyed by creature to Moonkum, a thing of goblin silver and old paranoia that no anti-portkey ward built for a school tournament had been designed to stop, because it was older than the men who built the wards and answered to a name none of them knew. Voldemort raised his wand to kill him in the ritual's final movement, and Harry did not stand and duel him, because he was 14 and not a fool, and he did not beg, because he had never once in his life been made to beg. He looked Lord Voldemort in the red eyes and said, "You put a piece of yourself in a diary, and a 12-year-old killed it with a fang, and I've spent 2 years learning where you hid the rest." And then he closed his hand on the silver in his pocket and was gone, torn out of the graveyard by 1,200 years of black suspicion, leaving Lord Voldemort newly fleshed and screaming in a churchyard with nothing in his hand. The naming had been Harry's own idea, and he had carried it into the graveyard the way his parents had carried the will into the goblin's office, as a weapon disguised as words. He could have simply vanished, closed his hand on the silver the instant the ritual ended, and been gone before Voldemort drew breath. Instead, he had spent his 3 seconds on cruelty, the first deliberate cruelty of his life, and he had chosen it coldly, because Sirius had taught him that you strike an enemy where the strike will cost him most, and that a newborn god's most precious possession is his certainty of immortality. So he had told Lord Voldemort in the hour of his rebirth, surrounded by the masked servants who had waited 14 years for this, that 2 of his soul anchors were already ash, and that a child knew where the rest were hidden, and he had watched the red eyes change, watched the triumph of the resurrection curdle into something that had not crossed that ruined face in 14 years, which was fear. Then he was gone, and the Dark Lord was left to scream his fury at the headstones in front of the followers he had just summoned to witness his return, his first act in his new body a public rage at a 14-year-old who had walked into his trap, insulted his immortality, and strolled out a door the Dark Lord could not even see. It was not a victory. Voldemort had a body and an army and a country that would not believe in him for a year, which was a year to work in the dark. But it was not the victory he had planned, either, and the difference between the two had a name, and the name was a boy who had been taught that the point was never to be brave. The point was to come home. It should have been a triumph. In the cold arithmetic of survival, it was a triumph. Voldemort returned, but Harry lived, and he had named the Horcruxes to the Dark Lord's face, which had been a deliberate cruelty, Harry's own, a thing he had decided in advance, to let Voldemort know in his moment of rebirth that his immortality was already being unmade. But it was not a triumph in the house above the cove, because the portkey did not bring Harry home alone. It brought him home with Remus. Remus had been at the tournament, because of course he had, because a member of this family did not let Harry face a year-long trap without one of them near. He had been there under a glamour in the crowd, watching, and when the maze turned wrong and the portkey at its heart dragged Harry away, he had done the thing that was most like him and least wise, which was to seize Harry as he vanished, to add his own body to the snatch, so that the boy would not arrive wherever he was going alone. And it had worked. They had both come through. But a black portkey keyed for 1 passenger and forced to carry 2 does not carry them gently, and Remus Lupin arrived on the kitchen floor of Moonkum with Harry safe in his arms and his own life leaking out of him from the inside, from the violence of a passage his body had paid for so that Harry's would not. He lived. That has to be said plainly, because the chapter cannot bear it otherwise, and because it is true. Remus Lupin lived, through 3 days that Sirius spent not sleeping, and a healer Andromeda summoned, and a draft creature brewed from a black family book that no St. Mungo's healer had ever been permitted to read. But it was 3 days of not knowing, 3 days in which Harry sat by the bed of the last of his parents' friends and understood fully for the first time what the campaign cost, not in the abstract, not in the satisfying arithmetic of proven articles, but in the specific gray face of a man who had thrown himself into a tearing passage so that a boy would not be afraid and who might for that not wake. The family gathered in those 3 days the way the will had taught them to gather. Andromeda came and did not leave, and turned the kitchen into a still, competent ward. Ted brewed tea no one drank. Tonks arrived from the ministry gray-faced and stayed, her hair gone a flat mousy brown it had not been since childhood, sitting by the bed with her cousin's friend's hand in both of hers, because a metamorph magus who cannot manage a cheerful color is a metamorph magus telling you the truth about how frightened she is. Ron came, sent by a mother who packed him off with a basket and a fierce instruction to be useful, and was useful, in the small wordless ways the Weasleys had perfected across 7 children and not enough money, keeping the fire, keeping Harry fed, keeping the ordinary going so the extraordinary had something to rest against. Hermione came and did the thing only Hermione could do, which was to sit with Harry through the worst of the second night and not comfort him, because comfort was a lie and they both knew it, but to plan with him quietly in the dark the next phase of the hunt, because the only thing that helped Harry when the fear was total was to be reminded that fear was information and information was a thing you could use. He'd want us doing this, Hermione had whispered over the parchment with Remus Gray and still in the next room. Not weeping, working. He nearly died so you wouldn't be alone, Harry. The way you honor that isn't to fall apart alone in a corner. It's to be exactly the person he threw himself into a portkey to protect, the one who's loved and surrounded and still, even now, even tonight, thinking 3 moves ahead. She'd pushed the parchment toward him. So, 3 moves ahead, where would Tom Riddle hide the next piece of his soul, and how do we get to it before he learns we're coming? And Harry had bent his head over the parchment beside her, in the lighthouse light, with his family asleep around a man who had nearly died for him, and had done the thing he had been raised to do, which was to turn the worst night of his life into the next day's work, because that was what it meant in this house to grieve. "This is the bill," Harry said on the second night to Sirius by the bed. He was not crying. He had been raised too well to think tears were the only honest response, and he had a thing he needed to say while the fear was still sharp enough to make it true. "Malfoy told you. Dumbledore told you in his office he said it would cost. We've been proving articles and underlining them in gold and feeling clever, and the whole time the bill was running, and this is it. Remus on a kitchen table because the wall came down and the thing on the other side of it is real now, and it has a body and it knows I'm hunting it." He looked at his godfather. "I'm not saying we were wrong. I'm saying I finally understand the price, and I want you to know I understand it, because if I'm going to keep asking people to pay it, I should at least be the kind of person who knows what he's spending." Sirius looked at his godson across the gray, unconscious face of the man they both loved, and he did the thing he had spent 14 years learning to do, which was to tell the boy the truth even when the truth was hard, because the alternative was to become, by small kindnesses, the thing they were fighting. "Your dad threw himself down a staircase to buy your mother 3 seconds, Sirius said quietly. "Your mother stood in front of your cot when she could have run." Remus jumped into a portkey that he knew might kill him. "And every one of them did it for the same reason, Harry, the reason you're going to spend your whole life trying to understand and never quite forgive, because some things are worth the bill. Not because the bill is small, because the thing is large. Remus didn't do this for the campaign. He didn't do it to prove an article. He did it because the alternative was you, alone, arriving somewhere terrible without a single person who loved you, and he decided in about half a second that he would rather be torn apart than let that happen, and if you're asking me whether he'd do it again," Sirius's voice did not break quite. "He'd do it again, they'd all do it again. That's not the campaign's fault, Harry. That's just what it is to be loved by people who mean it. The bill isn't the price of fighting Dumbledore. The bill is the price of being worth fighting for, and you've been worth it since the night I carried you out of a house with no roof, and I have never once, not for 1 second, thought you weren't." On the 3rd day, Remus woke. He woke to a boy asleep in a chair by his bed, and a man asleep on the floor beside him, and a house elf standing guard at the door with a black family blade across his knees. And he looked at the strange family the will had built, gathered around him in a kitchen above the sea, and he smiled, weak and gray and entirely himself, and said in a voice like paper, "Did the portkey work?" "Is he?" And Sirius woke and gripped his hand and said, "Yes, yes, he's here, you mad bloody hero, he's right here." And Remus closed his eyes and let himself rest, because the boy was home, and that had been the whole of his plan. The Ministry did not want Voldemort to be back, and so, for a while, with the particular genius of frightened institutions, it decided that he was not. Cornelius Fudge, who had been Minister for Magic for the better part of a decade, and who had spent that decade in the comfortable lee of Albus Dumbledore's certainty, received the news that the Dark Lord had returned to a body in a country churchyard, and he received it from a 14-year-old and a discredited XG4 in a black, and he did the thing that men in his position do, which was to weigh the truth against the catastrophe of the truth and find the truth wanting. To admit that Voldemort had returned was to admit that the war was beginning again, that the peace he had presided over was a lie, that the man the public had just finished dismantling had been right about the storm, and it was easier, so very much easier, to decide instead that a traumatized boy had imagined it, that a grieving godfather was building a fresh panic to extend his crusade. That the whole thing was the next move in the long campaign against poor Albus, rather than the catastrophe Albus had warned of from the steps of the chamber he was made to surrender. "He'll deny it," Amelia Bones said grimly, in her office, with the door warded and the monocle catching the light. "I've worked under Cornelius for 9 years, and I can tell you exactly how this goes. He'll deny it publicly, he'll lean on the prophet to call your godson unstable, and he'll do it precisely because you've spent 4 years teaching the country to distrust authority, only now the authority that's lying is his, and he's going to use the habit of doubt you built against the truth you're telling. That's the cruelty of it, Lord Black. You taught a nation to ask who knew and when." Fudge is about to answer that the answer is a hysterical child. She set down a file. "But here's the thing he hasn't reckoned with, and it's the thing your whole campaign has been quietly building toward without any of us naming it. There's a body in this country now that does not answer to the minister, and does not answer to the chief warlock because there isn't one, and is the only institution with the legal standing to convene an inquiry into a matter of national security on its own authority. It's the reformed Wisengamot, the one Ogden rebuilt. The one with 11 proven articles behind it and 9 angry elders at its head, and a black with 2 votes in its benches. Fudge can deny Voldemort all he likes. He cannot stop the court you built from holding an inquiry, summoning witnesses under oath, and putting the question to the country in the open. You spent 4 years making a body that doesn't need the minister's permission to look at a hard truth. The monocle glinted. Use it, convene it, make them look. Dumbledore came to Moonkum on the 4th day. He came alone without warning, and he stood at the cove gate and waited to be admitted, because the black wards would not let him pass uninvited, and he did not try them. And Sirius went down to the gate, and the 2 of them stood on either side of it in the sea wind, the man who had spent 14 years dismantling the other, and the man who had let himself be dismantled, and for a while neither spoke. "I came to see whether Remus lived," Dumbledore said at last. "I find I could not wait to hear it by Owl. He was my agent once in the worst way, in the way your 4th article describes, and I used him badly, and I have never had the chance to be sorry to his face for it, and I find I would like the chance before the time runs out, which it is doing faster now. He looked old at the gate, older than the cliffs. He lives. Good." The old man closed his eyes for a moment. "That is good. That is one thing, at least, that did not break." He opened them, and the steel was there, and under the steel, for once, something that was almost pleading. "Harry named my secrets to Voldemort in the graveyard, the Horcruxes. He knows I know about them. Voldemort knows that the boy knows, which means Voldemort knows the boy has been guided, and there is only one mind in Britain Voldemort believes capable of guiding him, and it is mine, and so the war that is coming will be aimed at this house and at my school both, at everyone the boy loves, because that is how Voldemort fights. He does not come for you, he comes for what you would die to protect." Dumbledore's hands tightened on the head of his wand. "Sirius, I am going to ask you one more time, and then I will never ask again, because there will not be time. There is a thing about Harry that I have carried alone for 14 years. It is the 11th article. It is the worst thing your friends suspected, and it is true, and I have been unable to say it because saying it changes everything, and I did not know, I genuinely did not know, whether the boy who would have to hear it would be strong enough to carry it, or whether the carrying would break him into exactly the weapon Voldemort needs. I have watched you make him strong. I have watched you make him loved. And I think the thing I was protecting him from by silence, you may have protected him from by love, and that I may have been wrong, 14 years wrong, about what a child can survive knowing." He met Sirius's eyes through the gate. "Bring him to the school, both of you. There is a thing I have to show you in a basin in my office that I have shown no living soul, and when you have seen it you will understand the 11th article completely, and you will hate me more than you ever have, and you will also, I hope, finally have the one thing you have wanted for 14 years, which is the whole truth, all of it, with nothing locked in any cellar. Come to the school. Let me show you what your friends died suspecting. Let me, for once in my life, tell someone everything before it is too late." Sirius stood at the gate in the sea wind with the wards humming between them, and behind him in the house a boy slept by a man who had nearly died for him, and the will hung on the kitchen wall with 9 articles underlined in gold and one, the 11th, the worst, the unprovable, still dark. "We'll come," Sirius said. "Merlin, help us both. We'll come and we'll see your basin and we'll hear the whole truth, and then Albus, then we'll decide what to do with it. Not you, us. Whatever's in that scar, whatever you've been raising him toward, it stops being your secret the moment you show it to me, and it becomes a thing this family decides together, around a kitchen table, the way we've decided everything for 14 years. He turned to go back up to the house and stopped and looked back at the old man at the gate. You said the 11th's true. You said it like it costs you. So I'll tell you the thing I've been saving for the day you finally admitted it. The sea wind took the words and gave them weight. You raised your weapons lonely so they wouldn't fear dying. I raised mine loved so he'd fight to live. We're about to find out which kind wins. I already know. I've known since he was 9 days old and wouldn't let go of my collar. Come up to the house when you're ready, Albus. The wards will know you're invited now. Mind the third step. It's loose, and even old paranoia can't fix everything. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The 11th article. The basin was a shallow stone bowl carved with runes, and the silver-gray stuff that moved in it was neither liquid nor light, and Albus Dumbledore stood beside it in his cluttered office with his blackened, dying hand resting on the rim, and said, "Before I show you, I must show you this," and he held up the hand. It was ruined. The flesh had gone the color of a thing struck by lightning and left to char, and the ruin was creeping slowly up past the wrist, and Sirius understood, looking at it, that he was being shown a clock. A year, perhaps less, Dumbledore said, with the calm of a man long past arguing with a verdict. I put on a ring that I should not have touched, a thing of Voldemort's, one of the soul anchors your family has been so efficiently destroying, and I destroyed it, but it was cleverer than I was, and it has been killing me by inches since. So you will forgive me if I do not waste what is left being gentle. I am going to show you the truth, all of it, the 11th article entire, and it is going to be the worst thing you have ever heard, and I am going to let you hate me for it without defending myself, because I have run out of the time it takes to be forgiven, and I find I would rather be understood. He gestured at the basin. Look, both of you, together, since that is how you have done everything, and since it is I have come to believe, the reason you are about to succeed where I would have failed. They looked. They went down into the silver-gray stuff together, godfather and godson, and they came up a long while later, and Harry's face was white and Sirius's was something worse than white, and the office was very quiet, and the dying man waited. What they had seen was this. The full prophecy at last, neither can live while the other survives, the marking of the boy as the Dark Lord's equal, the power the Dark Lord knew not. And then the thing the prophecy did not say, and Dumbledore had worked out alone across 14 years. That on the night Lily Potter died, the curse that should have killed her son had rebounded off her sacrifice and shattered against the infant Harry, and that Voldemort, already torn to pieces by his own Horcrux making, had left one more piece than he intended, a fragment of his soul, lodged in the only living vessel to hand, behind the scar in the child. That Harry Potter had carried, his whole life, a splinter of the thing that murdered his parents. That while the splinter lived, Voldemort could not truly die, because a part of him was anchored in a boy. And that therefore this was the memory that had made Harry go white, Dumbledore saying it to a younger order in a locked room years ago, saying it with tears in his eyes and absolute resolve in his voice. Therefore, when the time came, the boy would have to die. That Harry had to be raised, kept safe, kept good, kept whole, precisely so that at the appointed hour he could be brought to Voldemort and allow himself to be struck down, so that the splinter would die with him and the Dark Lord could at last be killed by another hand. That the protecting had a purpose, and the purpose was a death, and the death was Harry's own, and Dumbledore had known it since Harry was a year old and had let a child grow up under his kindness like a lamb let grow under a careful shepherd, for the slaughter. Pig for slaughter, Sirius said. His voice had no bottom to it. That's what you'd have made of him. That's what the article means. Raise the boy, keep him sweet, keep him trusting, and at the end walk him to the altar yourself and tell him it's for the greater good and watch him say yes, because you'd have raised him to say yes. That was the plan. That was always the plan. From the night I carried him out of that house, that was the thing you were measuring him for. Yes, said Dumbledore. He did not flinch from it. That was the unbearable thing, the thing that would have broken a lesser man's claim to grief. He did not flinch. That was the plan, he said. I will not soften it. I worked it out when Harry was a year old, and I have carried it alone every day since, and I told no one whose love might weaken it, because the plan required a boy who would walk to his death willingly when the time came, and a boy who walks willingly to his death is a boy who has been raised to believe his death is the only door. Lonely, burdened, grateful to the man who finally explains his purpose to him. I have made such weapons before, serious of other people's children in the last war, and they worked, and the making of them is the great sin of my life, the one I cannot lay at necessity's feet, because I enjoyed being the one who understood. And I meant to make one more. I meant to make Harry. The blue eyes turned to the boy, and they were wet, and the steel was gone now, all of it, leaving only an old man at the end of his road. And then your godfather took you out of my reach on the strength of a will I could not unseal, and he raised you in a house above a cove with a werewolf and a goblin and a Christmas goose, and he made you the one thing my plan could not use. He made you loved, he made you happy, he made you a boy who comes home. Dumbledore's ruined hand closed on the rim of the basin. And a boy who comes home will not walk willingly to an altar, he will look for another door. He has been looking for another door his whole life, because he was taught to by a man who loved him too much to teach him there was only one. I built a plan that required a lamb. Sirius built a wolf with a family. In standing here dying, I find that I am, God help me, after everything, I find that I am glad, because I think your wolf is going to find the door my lamb never could, and I would rather end my life having been defeated by love than having been proven right by a child's corpse. Show me I was wrong, Harry. I have spent 14 years afraid that I was right, be the proof that I was not. It is the only absolution I have any business asking for, and I am asking it of the one person on earth with the most reason to deny me. Harry looked at the old man for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was steady, because he had been raised by a man who had taught him that the steadiest voice is the one that has decided something. You're not asking for absolution, Harry said. You're asking me to do the thing you couldn't, and then you're going to die feeling better about it. I'm not going to give you that. I'm not going to make my living be about your conscience. He stepped closer to the basin, to the dying man, and the green eyes, Lily's eyes, the eyes everyone always mentioned, were not cruel and were not kind, they were precise. But I am going to live, not for you, not as your proof. For me and for Sirius and for Remus who nearly died so I wouldn't be alone, and for 2 people who sat in a goblin's office and wrote your name 12 times so that one day their son would get to be a person instead of a tool. I'm going to find the other door. And here's the part you didn't plan for, Professor, the part your whole sad clever scheme never accounted for. He laid it out the way he laid out everything, the way Sirius had taught him 14 years before with hidden biscuits and a guilty dog. I already found it, 2 years ago, in a flooded chamber with a fang. We've been destroying the pieces of him without dying, one by one, because it turns out you don't have to be the vessel that dies, you just have to destroy the splinter while keeping the boy. And nobody worked out how to do that all these years, because the only person who knew about the splinter and me was a man who'd already decided the boy and the splinter died together. You never looked for the other door, Albus. You were so certain there wasn't one that you spent 14 years polishing the altar instead. We've spent 2 years building the door, it's nearly finished. And you're going to help us finish it because you owe my parents a debt no apology covers, and because for once in your life you're going to be the man who hands the knowledge over instead of the man who hoards it for the right moment. Show us the rest, all of it, every Horcrux, every protection, everything you know. Empty the cellar, Professor, while you still have a year to do it in. And Albus Dumbledore, who had hoarded secrets for 115 years, who had managed and parceled and timed and withheld the truth from everyone he ever loved, because he could not bear to share the one thing that made him necessary, looked at the boy he had meant to raise for slaughter and had instead watched be raised for life, and he began, at last, to empty the cellar. The legal war and the secret war ran side by side that year, the way they always had, because the family had learned long ago that a thing destroyed in the dark is only half destroyed until it is also proven in the light. While they hunted soul anchors with venom and goblin rites, Amelia Bones convened the inquiry she had promised, the one the minister could not stop, because it answered to a reformed Wisengamot and not to him, and she put the question of Voldemort's return to the country in the open, under oath, with witnesses, in the chamber Tiberius Ogden had rebuilt. Cornelius Fudge denied it to the last. He sat in the witness chair and explained, with the desperate reasonableness of a drowning man describing the water as dry, that a traumatized boy and a vengeful godfather had manufactured a panic, and then Amelia Bones called, one after another, the witnesses Fudge could not wave away. A captured Death Eater, taken alive at Moonkum's wards and questioned under the same Veritaserum that the war's old hero had made lawful, describing the churchyard and the cauldron and the rebirth in flat, dreaming, undeniable detail. A goblin Aesir, confirming that 2 cursed soul anchors had been destroyed in Gringotts vaults within the year, objects that could only exist if their maker still walked. And at the last, Harry Potter himself, 16 years old, who put his hand on the recording stone and described the graveyard in a voice so level and so specific that the chamber went silent the way chambers do when they have stopped doubting and started being afraid. He convened a court that didn't need his permission to look at a hard truth, Sirius said to Harry afterward on the steps of the ministry, watching Fudge's certainty crumble in real time as the Wisengamot voted over the minister's objection to recognize the return and mobilize against it. That's what we built all those years without quite knowing it, not just a weapon against Dumbledore. A thing that asks who knew and when, that can't be told to stop looking, that doesn't answer to whoever's frightened of the answer. Your parents started it in a goblin's office. Ogden finished the frame. And the first real thing it did, the very first, was force a whole country to stop pretending the monster wasn't real. He squeezed his godson's shoulder. They'll write that the boy who lived defeated Voldemort. They'll be wrong. A court did. A court your dead parents built out of 12 accusations and a refusal to be managed. Don't let them forget that part, Harry. It's the part that outlasts both of us. It took the year he had left, very nearly to the day. The hunt was a family operation, because by then everything was. There were 4 soul anchors still in the world. Dumbledore had destroyed the ring at the cost of his hand and his life. The diary and the locket were ash, which left a cup, a diadem, a snake, and the splinter in Harry, and they took them the way they had taken everything, methodically, with goblins and law and the strange, loyal household the will had built. The cup came out of a Lestrange vault, surrendered by Gringotts itself once Sirius proved, through Black family law, that the vault's lease was forfeit for harboring a cursed object in violation of the goblins' own ancient covenants. The goblins, it turned out, hated a Horcrux in their vaults far more than they hated breaking faith with a depositor, because a Horcrux was a contract with death, and the goblins did not honor contracts with death. The diadem came out of a room in Hogwarts that the castle itself, in its long, patient way, gave up to a headmaster who was finally, at the end, asking it honestly for help instead of keeping his own counsel. Each one was destroyed with basilisk venom and a goblin rite, and each one screamed, and the world grew, by degrees, less haunted. The cup was the hardest because it lay in a Lestrange vault in the deepest and oldest part of Gringotts, behind protections that the Lestranges had paid the goblins handsomely to maintain, and a goblin who has been paid to guard a thing does not lightly give it up, even to another goblin, because the whole of goblin civilization rests on the principle that a guarded thing stays guarded. So Sirius did not ask them to break faith. He did the other thing, the black thing, the thing his terrible, clever family had perfected over 1,200 years. He found the older contract that overrode the newer one. Kreacher knew it. Kreacher had always known it. 3 centuries before, in the founding covenants between the Goblin Nation and the great wizarding houses, there was a clause, the Sundering Clause the goblins called it, which held that no vault of Gringotts might harbor an object of soul magic, a thing that anchored a wizard against death, because such an object was a contract with death itself, and the goblins, who took contracts more seriously than any race alive, would not be made unwitting parties to the one contract they considered an abomination. The clause had not been invoked in 300 years. It had never been repealed. And a thing never repealed, Hermione had taught them all, is only a dead letter until someone with standing wakes it. "You are asking us," said Ragnarok, the high goblin, in the deep chamber where the Lestrange Vault's guardians had been summoned, to seize a paying client's most precious possession on the strength of a covenant older than the client's family. "I'm asking you," Sirius said, in the deep red robes of a voting lord, with Thornback at his shoulder and the certified will in his hand, "to honor your own oldest law over your newest fee. The cup in that vault is a Horcrux. It anchors Lord Voldemort against death. By the Sundering Clause, Gringotts cannot harbor it, and has been harboring it unknowing for 16 years, which means the Lestranges defrauded the bank. They paid you to guard a thing your own founding law forbids you to hold, and concealed its nature to do it. You haven't been a guardian of that cup, Ragnarok. You've been a victim of it. The fraud is theirs. The remedy is yours." He laid the will on the stone. "I'm not asking you to break a contract. I'm asking you to enforce the one that matters most. The oldest one, the one that says goblins do not do business with death." Ragnarok was silent for a long moment, and around the chamber the assembled goblins were very still, because Sirius Black had done the one thing that could move them. He had not appealed to mercy, or to the war, or to the lives at stake, none of which a goblin was obliged to weigh. He had appealed to the law, to the oldest law, to the thing the goblins held more sacred than gold. "The Sundering Clause is invoked," Ragnarok said at last, and the word went around the chamber like a bell. "Let the record show that the House of Lestrange defrauded the nation by concealing a soul anchor in a vault of this bank, and that the nation reclaims the abomination as is its ancient right, and that the fraudulent vault is forfeit. Bring up the cup." His black eyes found Sirius. "You argue like a goblin, Lord Black. I do not know whether to be impressed or insulted, and I have decided, after long consideration, to be both. The cup is ours to surrender, and we surrender it to the only purpose a soul anchor may lawfully be put to, which is its destruction. Do it in our presence. We should like to watch a contract with death be broken. We so rarely get to." The cup screamed like the others when the venom took it. The goblins watched it die with the grave satisfaction of accountants closing a fraudulent account, and it was, Harry thought, exactly the right audience for the death of a thing that had believed it could cheat the final ledger of all. And the splinter in Harry, the 11th article made flesh, the thing that was supposed to require his death, they took out of him in a goblin chamber 3 levels below Gringotts, in a rite that Thornback warned them, in his flat ledger voice, had been performed exactly 4 times in recorded history, and had killed the patient on 3 of those occasions. "It is not the magic that kills," Thornback said the night before, with the family gathered around the kitchen table at Moonkum and the will glowing on the wall with 11 articles underlined in gold. "The magic merely severs the parasite from the host. What kills is the severance itself. The host's soul, accustomed to sharing its house with the intruder for so many years, is torn when the intruder is ripped away, and a torn soul, untethered, drifts and does not always find its way back into the body. The 3 who died did not die of the spell. They died of having nothing strong enough to call them home. The garnet on his staff caught the lighthouse light. The one who lived was a mother of 7, and she lived, the records say, because in the moment of severance she heard her children calling her name, and a soul that is loved enough has a rope back. That is the entire science of it. Mr. Potter and goblins do not traffic in sentiment, so understand that I am telling you a measured operational fact and not a comfort. You will survive this rite if, and only if, you are anchored to the world by bonds strong enough to haul a drifting soul back into its flesh. The intruder in you was placed by a man who loved nothing. It can only be removed by a man who is loved by a great many things. You are, I am given to understand, the most thoroughly loved person in Britain. For the first time in 16 years, the goblin's flat face did something that was almost a smile. It is the only reason I have agreed to attempt it. By my arithmetic, Mr. Potter, your odds are better than anyone's in the history of the rite, because the history of the rite never before included a patient who was deliberately, systematically, stubbornly loved from the cradle precisely so that one day he could not be made to die. Your godfather has been building your rope back for 16 years. He simply did not know what he was building it for. Neither did I until tonight. Get some sleep. We sever at dawn. They severed at dawn, and it is not a thing that can be told from the inside, what Harry felt when the splinter tore loose. The long gray drift in a place that might have been a station or might have been the inside of his own emptied skull, the pull of the easy dark and the silence that offered gently to let him stop. What can be told is the outside. What can be told is that around the goblin altar 3 levels below London stood the family the will had made, Sirius and Remus Mendied and grey-streaked, and Andromeda and Ted and Tonks with her hair gone fierce and bright, and Ron and Hermione who had grown up alongside him, and Creature with a black blade across his knees, and somewhere in the gallery a great half-giant weeping frankly into his beard because he had asked 16 years before to know the boy and that they called him. Not silently, not with dignity. They called his name out loud, all of them, the way you call a dog in from a storm, the way Sirius had called James's name in a ruined house, the way Harry had once gripped a collar in a cot and refused to let go, and the rope held, and the drifting soul felt the pull of 16 years of being wanted and came home. He woke on the goblin altar with his scar gone smooth and white and quiet forever, and the first face he saw was his godfather's, and Sirius did not say anything clever for once in his life, because there are moments the flippancy knows to stand aside for. He just put his hand on the back of Harry's neck, the old gesture, the one from 1,000 ordinary days, and held on, and Harry held on back. And the splinter of Lord Voldemort that had been meant to require his death was a smear of ash on a goblin altar instead. And the 11th article, the worst of the 12, the unprovable one, the one about a boy raised for slaughter, had been answered not by proving it false but by making it not matter, which was Sirius thought. Looking down at his living godson, a far better answer than the law could ever have given. Voldemort died 11 days later, and he died mortal, and he died at the hands of a great many people at once, which was the final insult to a man who had spent his life making himself singular. He came for Harry, of course, when his spies brought him the impossible news that the boy's scar had gone quiet. Because a quiet scar meant the anchor was gone, meant his own immortality was spent, meant that the one person who could feel him through the link could feel him no longer, and a Voldemort who has lost his immortality and been publicly insulted does not calculate. He rages, and he brought his Death Eaters down on Moonkum in the grey hour before a winter dawn. Expecting a lonely boy and a reckless guardian and an easy slaughter, he found, instead, what the will had built. He found black wards 1,200 years old that turned his curses back on their casters. He found a reformed ministry that had finally, under the lash of the Wisengamot inquiry, been made to admit he was real, and had come, Aurors led by a pink-haired witch who had requested the duty in writing, and behind them Amelia Bones with the whole weight of a department that had remembered what it was for. He found Remus Lupin, who had jumped into a tearing portkey for this boy once and would have done worse. He found goblins who do not fight wizards' wars but will fight to enforce a contract, and there was a contract, 16 years old, that said the boy was theirs to protect. And he found Harry Potter, 16, mortal himself, no longer the equal-marked vessel of anything, standing in the door of the house he had been raised in, with a holly wand and a family at his back, and not 1 ounce of the willing lamb's stillness Dumbledore's plan had required, because Harry had never once in his life been alone enough to learn it. It was not a duel. Sirius had taught him too long ago to remember learning it, that a duel was a thing two lonely men did to prove something, and that the point was never to prove something, the point was to win and go home. So Harry did not face Lord Voldemort alone in single combat while the others watched. He fought him the way the family fought everything together, all of them at once. An Auror's stunner and a werewolf's fury and a goblin's blade and a metamorphogus's misdirection, and an old elf's ancient house magic and 2 children grown clever and a godfather who had waited 16 years to stand between this monster and this boy. And Voldemort, mortal at last, anchored to nothing, loved by no one, propped up by followers who served him out of fear and fled the moment fear stopped working. Came apart against a thing he had never in his long ruined life been able to understand or counter or make, which was a family that simply would not let one of its own be taken. There was one moment in the gray churn of it, when the whole 16 years nearly ended the way they had begun, with a Potter and the people who loved him in a house under attack. Voldemort, mortal and cornered and abandoned by the followers who had discovered that a master who can die is only a man, made his last calculation the way he had made his first. He looked for the thing the boy would die to protect, and he found it, and it was not a thing, it was a person. It was the reckless, devoted man who had carried the boy out of a ruined nursery, and Voldemort turned his wand from Harry to Sirius and spoke the killing curse with the last of his ruined strength. And Sirius, who had spent 16 years between this monster and this boy, who had told a goblin in a broken chair that everything in him wanted to do the reckless thing, and had learned across a decade and a half to do the clever one instead, Sirius did the reckless thing. Of course he did. He stepped in front of Harry the way James had stepped in front of Lily, the way his whole life had been pointing toward, and for one terrible heartbeat the story folded back on itself, and the green light came for the man who had refused, 16 years before, to hand the baby away. But this was not the ruined nursery, and Sirius Black was not alone, and that was the entire difference, the difference the Will had spent 16 years building. Because Remus was there, and Remus had jumped into a tearing portkey for this family once and moved faster now than a curse, and he hauled Sirius sideways by the collar. And Tonks was there, her hair gone white with effort, and she threw a shield charm across the gap. And Creature was there, an old house magic that no wizard fully understood, folded the air. And the green light, robbed of the still and solitary target it needed, met a shield and a shove and a shimmer of elf magic all at once, and guttered to nothing against the doorframe a foot from a man who had been ready, gladly, to die. Sirius hit the floor of his own kitchen alive, with the breath knocked out of him and his godson's hands already on him, and he understood lying there the last lesson of the whole long war, that James had died because James had been alone in that hall with 3 seconds, and that he had lived because he had spent 16 years making sure that no one in this family would ever face the dark with only 3 seconds, and no one beside them. "You absolute idiot," Harry said, hauling him up, and his voice was not steady for once, and Sirius decided that was allowed. "You stepped in front of it after everything. After 16 years of teaching me the point is to come home, you stepped in front of a killing curse. And I came home," Sirius wheezed, grinning, alive, ridiculous, "because you lot dragged me. That's the point, Pronkslet, that's been the point the whole time. You don't refuse to step in front of the curse. You just make sure you've got a family standing close enough to pull you back. Now turn around and finish this, because I did not survive my own stupidity to miss the good part." Harry's was the last spell in the end, because it was right that it should be. A plain, disarming charm that met a killing curse from a wand that no longer answered its master, and the green light guttered and died, and Tom Riddle fell, finally and only and forever mortal, in the doorway of a house above a cove, killed not by a chosen one's noble sacrifice, but by a loved one's refusal to sacrifice anything at all. Albus Dumbledore did not see it. He had died 9 days before in his office, with the year he had been given spent exactly as he had promised, every secret handed over, every cellar emptied, the last of his strength poured into helping the family build the door he had spent 14 years insisting did not exist. Sirius had been with him at the end, which surprised them both. He had gone, he told Harry afterward, not to forgive. He was not sure he ever would entirely, and he had decided that was honest and would have to do. But because a man should not die alone if a person can be spared to sit with him, and because somewhere under the schemes and the slaughter plan and the 14 years of terrible kindness, Albus Dumbledore had been a person, and the will's whole argument in the end was that persons mattered, even the ones who had forgotten it about themselves. They buried Albus Dumbledore at the school he had loved, the one office of the three he had ever truly wanted, and the funeral was vast and strange and full of people who did not know whether they had come to mourn a great man or a terrible one, which was, Harry thought, standing at the back with his family around him. Exactly the right confusion to bury the man in, because it was the truth. And he had spent his life making people choose between his greatness and his crimes, when the whole of him had always been both at once. Harry did not speak at the funeral. But he went, which surprised the prophet, and he stood with Sirius and Remus and did not perform either forgiveness or hatred. And afterward, when a reporter asked him, the boy who lived, the one Dumbledore had meant to raise for slaughter, here at the slaughterer's grave, what he felt, Harry gave the answer that would be quoted for the rest of his life, because it was the answer of a person who had been raised to tell the precise truth instead of the comfortable one. I feel, Harry said, that he was a person who decided, a long time ago, that people were pieces. And he was so clever and so sad and so certain that for most of a century everyone let him move them. He moved my parents onto a board and they died there. He was going to move me onto a board and have me die there too. And the only reason I'm standing here instead of lying in the ground beside him is that, the night my parents died, somebody decided I was a person and not a piece and spent 16 years proving it in a kitchen with cocoa at 3 a.m. That's the whole story, that's all of it. He thought the war would be won by the cleverest person on the board. It was won by the people who refused to be on the board at all. He looked at the grave, and then deliberately away from it, at his godfather. I don't forgive him, but I'm not going to spend my life on him either. He spent enough lives, I'm going to go home and be a person. That's the thing he could never do in the end, and it turns out it's the only thing that ever beats him. And the country read it over breakfast and asked itself the question Harry had been raised to ask, the question that would slowly remake the whole of Wizarding Britain in the decades that followed, not who is the cleverest, not who shall be trusted with 3 offices and 100 lives, but the simpler, harder, more dangerous question that 2 frightened people had first asked in a goblin's office 16 years before. Who knew and when and why did they wait, and what did it cost the people they decided were pieces? You ask me, Sirius said, on the night it was finally over, by the fire at Moonkum with the wards quiet and the dead mourned and the living miraculously mostly whole, right at the end whether the boy would forgive him. And I told him the truth, which is that you probably won't, not all the way, and that you shouldn't have to. And he smiled, Harry. He smiled and he said, these were nearly the last words, so I've kept them exact. He said, good. A boy who forgives, that would be a boy I could still have used. Sirius, you raised the one child in England I could not have turned, and I have spent my dying year being grateful for the only defeat of my life. Tell him I said the 11th article was true, and that being proven wrong about it is the finest thing that ever happened to me. Sirius turned the old certified copy of the will in his hands, the one that had hung on the kitchen wall for 16 years. So that's that, all 12, Harry. The inquiry sustained the 11th last week, his own memories, the basin, entered into the record. Every article your parents wrote in fear in a goblin's office proven in the law, sworn and sustained. They were right about everything, every single thing. 2 frightened people, 10 weeks from dying, and they were right about all 12. He set the will down on the hearth between them, and for a while neither of them said anything, because the fire was warm and the tide was loud below the house, and the lighthouse swept its slow gold beam across the room the way it had since the night a man with no idea how to raise a child had carried a baby out of a house with no roof. I keep waiting to feel like I won, Harry said eventually. He was 16 and the scar on his forehead was smooth and quiet, and he would carry it the rest of his life as nothing worse than a scar. Everyone keeps telling me I won, the boy who lived, again, and I don't feel like I won a war. I feel like I got to grow up, that's all. I feel like I got to grow up in a house I loved with people who loved me, and at the end of it I got to keep them, which everyone keeps acting like is some enormous victory, and I suppose it is, but it doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like the thing that was supposed to happen. It feels like the ordinary thing 2 people died trying to give me. Sirius looked at his godson across the firelight, the boy who was nearly a man now, who had his mother's eyes and his father's hair and a steadiness that belonged to neither of them and had been built, day by ordinary day in this kitchen, out of cocoa at 3 a.m, and howlers that said I love you and a will read aloud by the fire every Christmas with the proven articles underlined in gold. That's because it was the ordinary thing, Sirius said. That's the whole secret, Harry. That's the thing Dumbledore never understood, the thing that beat him in the end. He thought the war would be won by something extraordinary, a chosen one, a noble death, a perfect sacrifice arriving at the perfect hour. And it was won in the actual event by something so ordinary he couldn't even see it coming. It was won by a kid who got to be happy, by a family that ate dinner together, by the most boring, unremarkable, impossible to counter weapon in the world, which is a person who was loved enough that he had no broken places for the dark to live in. He reached out and ruffled the impossible hair and produced on cue the scowl, and the scowl was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, because it was 16 years old and entirely unafraid. Your parents knew. That's what the will really was under all the articles and the law and the 12 crimes. It wasn't a weapon against Dumbledore, not really. It was a set of instructions for how to love you properly, dressed up as a legal document because they were too frightened and too proud to just write love him on a piece of parchment and hope. Tell him he was loved, the goblin read, that first night. Tell him that first and often before you tell him any of the rest. Sirius's voice was steady, the way it went when he meant something entirely. I've been telling you for 16 years. I'm not going to stop now just because the war's over. You were loved, Harry. You were loved from the first second and you'll be loved until the last one, and that, in the end, turned out to be the only thing in the whole world strong enough to win. Outside, the tide came in. The lighthouse beam swept the kitchen, gold and slow, and crossed the will on the hearth, and lit for a moment the 12 articles, all of them underlined now, all of them proven, all of them answered, and then it moved on the way light does and left the two of them in the firelit dark, a man and the boy he had been given the impossible gift of getting to raise, sitting together in a warm house above the sea, with nothing left to prove and nowhere left to be but home. Creature made cocoa. It was, after all, very late, and there had once been a small voice that came down the corridor after bad dreams, and old habits in a house that had learned how to love are the very last things to go. Chapter 7 End.